Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Fire, Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee. On our agenda today is a discussion on the London Fire Brigade's Community Risk Management Plan 1 year on. Please may I remind participants to silence your devices. Members of the public may like to follow @London Assembly on social media and use the hashtag #AssemblyFire for this meeting. Before we begin, we have a few small items of business. Firstly, I would like to extend our committee's congratulations to the London Fire Commissioner, Andy Rowe, on his award of the King's Service Medal in the New Year Honours List. I would also like to note the sad passing of Wayne Brown, Chief Fire Officer for the West Midlands Fire Service, and send our condolences to his family and his past colleagues at the LFB, where he spent 27 years of his career. I understand Andy and Fiona would like to say a few words about him.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to recognise Wayne's passing as a friend and as a colleague, both in the London Fire Brigade and in the National Fire Service. So I served with Wayne in different places for over 20 years. I stood shoulder to shoulder with him at some of the most challenging incidents I've been at. He was a fantastic operational officer, one of the best I've ever encountered, a real leader in the true sense of the word, and a trusted friend and colleague to a great many people in the London Fire Brigade. I think it's a sign of the influence he had and the value in which he was held that so many colleagues have reached out really to express their grief and their sadness for his family, and I can only offer in this public space our condolences to all of his family, who I know, like us, are devastated by his passing. My commitment to them is that we will honour his passing in an appropriate, dignified and disciplined way, as he always held himself, with an appropriate service remembrance in the London Fire Brigade. So really it was just the opportunity, and thank you, Chair, to remember him for the amazing service he provided to London and Londoners, his friendship, his decency and his professionalism, and a very, very sad loss to the London Fire Brigade and the National Fire Service. I think it would be wrong of me, however, to sit here and not remember some other colleagues, because I'm afraid the London Fire Brigade has had quite a difficult few weeks with the passing of other valued colleagues. So I'm afraid we lost firefighter Richard Peacock, who in the most tragic circumstances died saving his son whilst abroad. An excellent firefighter who served a long career in West London, who again, colleagues are devastated at his passing on a close watch in an area of London where he'd always worked. So again, I would like to offer my condolences to his family and his colleagues, who I know are still trying to make sense of the events that led to his death. Equally, I would like to offer my condolences, and I would like to remember firefighter Ben Phelps, a very long-serving firefighter from South East London. Again, a very well-respected career firefighter who had spent all of his career in that part of London and tragically passed following a courageous battle with illness. I would like to recognise his service to London and Londoners as well, and his dignity and his bravery in the time he suffered with that illness, which again I think exemplified the kind of values that we're talking about every day in the London Fire Brigade. If you think about culture, if you think about how we're trying to change ourselves, both Richard and Ben absolutely exemplified that in their service, their dignity and their courage. And then finally, actually someone who I would have counted as a friend and a good colleague, Chris O'Connor from our IT department, who was instrumental in keeping our creaking systems on the run sometimes, putting it frankly, a great guy who served decades in the London Fire Brigade and who passed again following a courageous battle with a serious illness that he faced with dignity. All of them exemplifying that service, that courage, that teamwork that we think underpins what it means to be in the London Fire Brigade. And I thank you, Chair, for giving us the opportunity to recognise their passing and offer our condolences to their families and their friends for the record. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to add a few words. I can't really articulate how shocked and saddened I was to hear about the death of Wayne Brown last week. As members will be aware, Wayne was Chief Fire Officer for the West Midlands Fire Service and the West Midlands Conurbation Local Resilience Forum Chair. Like Andy, I'd also like to reflect on a number of people's deaths, including firefighter Richard Peacock, firefighter Ben Phelps and Chris O'Connor. But I would particularly like to say a few words about Wayne. Wayne was a hugely valued and respected colleague in London Fire Brigade for 27 years before joining the West Midlands Fire Service. He provided an outstanding service to London during his time at LFB and went on, when he left London, to become the first black Chief Fire Officer in the country. Wayne was an experienced multi-agency and CBRN Gold Commander who attended a number of the UK's most significant operational incidents in recent years, including London terrorist attacks and the tragic fire at Grenfell Tower. As West Midlands LRF Chair, Wayne led the West Mids response to the COVID-19 pandemic and was a respected lead figure in resilience. It was devastating news for all those who knew Wayne, and my thoughts go out to Wayne's family, friends and colleagues at this incredibly difficult time. And I'm grateful, as I said, to the committee for the opportunity to pay our respects formally to him in this setting, as well as pay our respects to the friends and family and send our condolences to those who were close to Richard, Ben and Chris. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we continue with the main items of business, I'm just we've all seen on the news the horrible fire in Wembley over the past few days, and I'm hoping, Andy, you could update the committee on that.
Yep. So a very challenging incident for London firefighters. So we're talking about a clad block that was under an evacuation order. So already had at some point been subject to kind of intervention from us to ensure that the people living in the block, because of its clad state, had an evacuation plan. After kind of repeated visits and inspections, an alarm system installed to ensure that they evacuated rather than staying put. The fire itself was very quick spreading, extremely dynamic and very challenging for London firefighters to resolve. So we're talking 100% of the roof, we're talking a whole side of the building, flats inside affected, so a very considerable building fire affecting the majority of the building and having an impact on the block next door. I think it does say something, and I don't welcome this, but it does say something to the change I'm often asked to talk about in these committees, that the decisions taken in the very early part of that incident to facilitate evacuation, evacuate the second block, recognise the failure of the building, take appropriate and dynamic firefighting action based on new procedures, stand in stark contrast to the position we put good firefighters and officers in at the Grenfell Tower fire. And obviously, what I've had a sharp reminder about in testimony week, the week before, listening to the stories of bereaved and survivors, their incredible loss and pain in the most terrible way individually. I would say to them and to yourself as a committee that if you wanted an example of how the London Fire Brigade has changed, it would be in response to that incident. And I don't say that lightly nor glibly, because it gives me no comfort that we have had to change in that way, because we still have too many blocks unremediated in London, nearly 1,000 still. The pace of it from the construction industry and those who own those buildings is too slow, despite actually, to be fair, I think the efforts of almost every institution to try and force the pace of that. That situation continuing puts both firefighters and London residents at risk. It means people lose their houses and have to move into temporary accommodation. So I welcome the fact that we respond in an entirely different way. In doing so, we do so in a greater environment of risk. The decisions that my officers have to take are far more acute and high risk and have to be taken quickly in the face of often very quickly developing situations. Whilst I'm glad that those procedures work and we've had to enact them in multiple times. I wouldn't speak just to this incident either. We had an incident earlier in the week where we had multiple FSG calls where control colleagues at the earliest opportunity advised London residents to leave their flats because they had made a determination from both in control and the incident ground that the block carried structural deficiencies that meant evacuation was justified. This is the environment our firefighters are operating in. My commitment to you as a committee and to Londoners who might be watching this and our firefighters is, again, we are doing something different in the post-incident response. We will have community engagement specialists down there on the ground. There will be public meetings to talk about our role in whatever historic interventions there has been on that block, how we can support the community moving forward to understand how to stay safe post-incident and deal with any kind of regulatory and fire safety issues ongoing as part of that. Does that give you enough kind of a brief of the nature of the incident and how it unfolded? The only thing I can say is that I'm thankful that we didn't see members of the public lose their lives.
Yeah, can I share the thanks of this committee for all the firefighters involved, and thank you for your update. It's really helpful. Can I ask our clerk, Diane Richards, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for absence have been received from the Deputy Chairman, Assemblymember Hall, for whom Assemblymember Boff will be substituting. And also, in addition, in accordance with Standing Order 2.4, Assemblymember Cooper will be attending virtually today.
That's wonderful, thank you. And can we note the list of offices held by Assembly members? And can I also ask members if they have any disclosable pecuniary interest in specific items listed on the agenda? Okay, and can we confirm the minutes of the meeting?
I have a cousin who's a firefighter.
Okay, thank you. And can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of November and 5th of December 2023? Great. And can we note the completed actions and outstanding, actions arising from previous meetings? And can we note the action taken by me as chair under delegated authority in consultation with party group lead members to agree the letter to the National Fire Chiefs Council on a national barred list? Okay, we now move on to the annual documents prepared by the London Fire Brigade in accordance with the Fire and Rescue Framework, notably the Statement of Assurance 2022-23 and the LFB Budget Submission 24-25, which forms the efficiency plan and includes the medium-term financial strategy and reserve strategy. These come to the committee in accordance with Section 327I of the GLA Act 1999 as amended. Once the committee has discussed the documents in accordance with the Act, the committee must make a report or recommendations to the Mayor. Do members have any specific questions or comments on these documents? Okay. Then can I ask the committee to note the London Fire Commissioner's draft reserve strategy and medium-term financial strategy 24-25, and agree to make the following report to the Mayor on the draft reserve strategy and medium-term financial strategy 24-25. The committee acknowledges that the documents contain all the relevant information, but notes that the London Fire Brigade is using £20 million from its fire safety improvement reserve over the next 2 years to provide for modernising and extending the training provided to firefighters. Whilst this improved training is welcome, the committee is concerned that the London Fire Brigade will need to address and secure longer-term funding to sustain this. The committee welcomes the reduction in use of the pre-arranged overtime and improved financial management demonstrated in these strategies. Can I also ask the committee to note the London Fire Commissioner's draft statement of assurance for 2022-23 and agree the following report to the Mayor on the draft statement of assurance 22-23. The committee acknowledges that the document contains all the relevant information and seeks ongoing assurance that the organisation is delivering on its community risk management plan. This includes addressing the recommendations from the independent culture review of the London Fire Brigade and from His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Services, and working with the Inspectorate to ensure that the Brigade no longer requires enhanced monitoring under Engage. You were to note that.
I'm not quite, being a substitute member, I'm not quite familiar with why we've had to do that statement. I recognise that's something we have to do, but bearing in mind the committee's concerns over the long-term funding of the service, is that something that should be referred to the Mayor, bearing in mind that the Mayor is currently considering the budget for this year?
But so we've noted the concerns of the committee that then go to the mayor.
This doesn't appear to be a reference to the mayor. That's my concern. The mayor is at this moment deciding the final budget. We, as a committee, you have identified that there are some shortfalls that need to be addressed, and therefore it seems the right time for the committee perhaps to address something to the mayor to say to address this problem. Seize the moment.
Yeah, but this goes to the mayor, so we can ask for a response. It's just when this comes. Yeah, fine. Okay. We're now. Yeah.
But that shouldn't take away from the main issue of traditionally the underfunding of this service by central government. I know it might be uncomfortable for Assemblymember Boff around those issues, but the core funding, the core settlement that we receive from central government is a key issue. On every occasion where there's been a shortfall and the mayor has been able to step in, he has been able to step in and support this service in the right and appropriate way. But we cannot continue to sustain that if central government doesn't play its full part. And I just want to put that on note in terms of that. But I understand why Assemblymember Boff raised that issue, and he was right to point out that. But equally, I think I'm right to point out there's a core deficiency here from central government in the funding of this service.
Okay, I agree.
I have to come back on that because I'm sorry, but I really have to come back on that. At the moment, the mayor is awash with cash, absolutely swimming in reserves. And if I refer back to what the chief finance officer said, Enver, he said absolutely they should be using GLA resources first before they start calling on extra support from the government. So that's why it was appropriate. I know that was a bit of a trigger for Assemblymember Duval, because he has to defend this vast amount of money that seems to be frittered away on election promises. But actually, we're talking about something really serious here. We're talking about the future of the fire service.
Chair, not wishing to
wishing
to prolong this conversation, I don't think protecting the fire service and its staff in terms of doing a difficult job is about frittering away resources at all.
No,
precisely what I did not say. He's frittering it away in other departments.
Look, if you need to be clear about what you're saying, then you need to be clear about what you're saying. So I've heard it as it is. I don't think it is, and I'll repeat again, frittering away resources in terms of protecting Londoners and providing support to our emergency services in a difficult job. It hasn't always been the case where we've had that money and government has gone missing in action in terms of supporting this service.
Discounted Friday travel is not.
We need to acknowledge this, that actually this service is never going to be it's also about a question of fairness. A question of fairness about supporting public services from central government to us. And I'll be the first to say where we can help and support ourselves, we should. But equally, while resources are being taken away from London, I'll be the first to say they should be spent in London in the way of fairness compared to other parts of the country. And what's happened to our public services, and particularly fire services and policing services, is money has been taken away from London in the past unfairly. And that's what I want to respond to. And I do, as I said, Assemblymember Boff was right to raise that issue. I think I'm entitled to point out the other side of how our expenditure comes to Londoners to be spent on emergency services.
Thank you, Assemblymember Duval. It's very helpful. Okay, now we're going to move on to our main item of business, which is a discussion of the London Fire Brigade's Community Risk Management Plan 1 year on. Can I welcome our guests? Baroness Twycross, Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience. Andy Rowe, London Fire Commissioner. Fiona Dolman, Director for Transformation, London Fire Brigade. Gareth Cook, Regional Officer, London Fire Brigades Union. And Verona Clarke, Borough Commander for Southwark, London Fire Brigade. I'll start off with a few questions and then I will hand over to my colleagues. First of all, to you, Anzi, and Baroness Twycross, what were the key challenges in finalising the CRMP at the start of last year?
Yeah. Prioritisation, I would suggest, because I think what both inspection in 2019 and the first report from the Grenfell Tower inquiry demonstrated was that change was needed in almost every part of the London Fire Brigade, from our underpinning culture to our systems that support delivery, so that's IT, procurement, property, to aspects of our response itself, our equipment. There's not really any one part of the London Fire Brigade that didn't require further investment or change, because I'm afraid in the most terrible way, and I have to say testimony was another sharp reminder. I mean, I live every day with the memories of June the 14th, 2017. It's part of what drives me on in the job, if I can be frank. But it was a sharp reminder that the London Fire Brigade had got to a point that night where many years, I'm afraid, of professional erosion and disinvestment meant that we let both members of the community down and firefighters, rank and file firefighters and officers who were ineffably heroic that night. But it pointed to an institution that needed change in every space. The challenge, therefore, was constructing a plan that over the longer term both recognised that but was also able to deliver it, and that was complex. So just the time taken to understand all the different independencies to get to a target operating model, this aspirational point where we're delivering a really world-class service, took both time and an understanding of where the risk laid in an environment that is changing all the time. So if you think about London, what we know before Grenfell is very different to what we know after Grenfell. If you think about the last 4 years, what we know about the effects of climate change, once you take the politics out of it, what we know about climate change is it has a profound impact on firefighting and firefighting business. You know, we've got the statistical evidence that shows, you know, we never had a 40-degree heat wave before. We didn't have the whole of the outside of London burning before. We hadn't had spate flooding in the way we saw the year before, with, you know, 4,000 calls in an afternoon, and the impact on residents and ordinary Londoners in that way. So we've got this incredible, growing, amazing city with a very different risk profile, becoming better understood, and then a service that needs to bring itself forward and change at the same time. So the challenge actually is the size, the complexity, how you deliver that to a workforce that is itself traumatised and fatigued and only has so much capacity for change, and do that under very kind of significant levels, rightly, by the way, of public and regulatory scrutiny. So the challenge is scale and breadth and depth, and how you keep it all moving.
Thank you, Chair. I think the question really points back to the delay in publishing the CRMP, and I think we've been on the record in this committee previously as acknowledging that the initial consultation on the CRMP didn't go as well as would have been expected, or it didn't run to time, and I think Fiona Dolman can potentially say a bit more about that. So I think the FREP committee's feedback into the process was welcome and taken on board, but I think the delay did cause problems and was definitely reflected in a very disappointing HMIC FRS inspection at the last full inspection round. We can point to a number of reasons. So we can point to delays due to COVID, to HMI, to having to deal with a number of reports being thrown at the brigade. But ultimately, we have ended up with a document and a strategy that I hope through the course of this meeting the committee sees is actually much more robust than if it had been rushed through at the last minute and published on time, that actually is being filtered down through every level. And I'm delighted Verona Clarke is here, because you'll be able to hear firsthand from her what this means for firefighters on the ground at a station level. But yes, it was challenging, it was delayed, it was tough, but have we got a better product at the end as a result? Yes. And I hope we get the opportunity to talk through why it's better and how we can make sure, and how it is built into processes now, that we will not get that type of delay again in the future, because the whole process and the whole way that the LFB is starting to do business through its sort of transformed business processes will mean that we will not see this type of delay again. So I'll just leave it at that and sort of look forward to a good discussion on progress.
Yeah, there'll be lots of questions about progress coming up. Fiona, did you want to add something to that? Oh, you look like you did. Okay, that's absolutely fine. But I'm going to ask you a question anyway. So, this committee made 19 recommendations, and I'm just wondering if you can tell us what actions you took to progress those recommendations.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So, you did make 19 recommendations in response to the draft community risk management plan. That was in August 2022. So we accepted all of those recommendations, and we've used them to make further changes to the KPIs that were set at the beginning of the CRMP period. There's some examples that we can turn to, and I have the full detail, if you'd like me to share that with you later, of the recommendations and how we've responded to every single one. But key things were around how our staff work with diverse communities to build trust, and sort of having more focus in the CRMP on that. How we developed a plan for engaging with our staff throughout the lifetime of the CRMP, and how we make sure that our staff really understand the CRMP and are properly engaged in that. And you're going to hear about that throughout the morning, because there's lots of different ways that we've done that now. And you also specifically asked that we had KPIs around the number of firefighters receiving initial training to respond to terrorist incidents, and I can confirm that that's been added into our KPI suite. So the other thing that we've done, which was based on your feedback, was finding the right balance between localism and maintaining London-wide standards. And hopefully, again, you'll be able to see throughout the morning through the questions that we think we're getting there with that, in terms of getting that right balance between the two.
Thank you. Andy, same question. Yeah.
So I'm just looking at the list. I mean, again, I could go through the list, and I don't know whether I know we've obviously provided feedback, I'm presuming formally, to the consultation kind of points. But looking down the list broadly, I would say that we think both scrutiny, challenge, and kind of participation in the development of that plan from the committee was both welcomed and useful, because looking down the list, we have effectively incorporated every point. And I think that speaks to both the value of kind of co-production at every level, whether it's in the community, and we did a lot of that with our colleagues in the Fire Brigades Union. Actually, we're very heavily involved, as you might imagine, because it is their role, provided some fairly robust challenge in some areas. You know, we don't always agree, but I think, as ever, we welcome their participation. So I think it's a reflection of our approach, which is, we know that in the past, top-down kind of strategically constructed plans don't always land well in either communities or fire stations. So again, if you talk about a challenge, I think part of the challenge was LFB was trying to grapple genuinely with a new approach, which was go out to the communities, go out to our fire stations, and try and get them to write a plan, speak to colleagues in the union. Not always successfully, because it was new to us. I think we sort of struggled through that process and how we engaged, how we communicated. And that was also partly what informed the delay, I think. It's just that trying to get it right and trying to give it some meaning to colleagues who've ultimately got to deliver it. But I think the fact that we did address all of your recommendations speaks to that intent and approach, and that the plan is better for it. And of course, we're going to discuss how we're doing against that plan in some detail across the rest of the committee.
I want to bring in Gareth and then Verona. Gareth, we're a year on from the CRMP. How much progress do you think it's made, and what's been the impact from your perspective?
For us, obviously, we appreciate that the RMP, which precursor to the CRMP, historically used to involve things such as efficiency savings, station closures and various bits and pieces. Firstly, I mean, we welcome the fact that none of those have been included in this CRMP, and it's actually a model which we do welcome, and a high-level strategic element of the CRMP has to translate down to that frontline piece of giving the autonomy to the practitioners out on fire stations within the communities, the ability and again the autonomy to be able to go out there and deliver what's absolutely necessary and proportionate based on the risk of where they work. They really are the best people, as I know you'll all be aware, having visited fire stations. They really take such great care in making sure that the communities of London are looked after and cared for, and it's because of our diversity, as we all know. It takes a particular style of approach, and I think the CRMP does lend itself to that well. Verona, I'm sure, will have a slightly more detailed appraisal of it, but for us, we welcome it in the simple fact that obviously looking after the employees of London Fire Brigade, our members, at the forefront of what we do. If it increases firefighter safety, if it looks after people in London, if it really does take care of business, for want of a better way of putting it, then we wholly welcome it. I think, does that answer your question?
Sorry, I didn't have my microphone on. Verona, I'll come to you. So just sort of what impact have you seen a year on? And is there anything more you'd like to see from it?
So the CRMP has allowed me as a borough commander to make some fundamental changes within my own borough risk management plan. So the CRMP as a whole, is a very strategic, very corporate document. What the restrictions of that is that doesn't tie down specifically into my borough, which is Southwark. So, what it's allowed me to do is take parts of the CRMP and really tailor it to what the community needs, what the risks are within the borough, and tailor it to what the incidents are that we attend. We don't do wildfires in Southwark. We only have 3 parks, etc. So actually, I'm able to really tailor it down to exactly what the community needs, and that was through the consultation. And hands up, as the Commissioner has said, the consultation wasn't as successful as potentially we wanted it to. However, it allowed us, especially within my borough, to go out to speak to residents, and we were able to feed back exactly what it is and translate it, which I can then put and have done into the BRMP.
Andy.
So everyone's got great manners, so I'll talk a little bit about the challenge of it as well, because at the end of the day I'm responsible for that plan. That's a statutory plan, that's our duty. One of the challenges is we've genuinely gone out with good intent to co-produce, to empower boroughs, and I hope that Verona and Gareth get the chance to talk about how firefighters from their perspective in their different roles are really grappling with this. I will be the first to admit that previous iterations of London safety plans, the transformation delivery plan that arose from the Grenfell Tower inquiry, we did not translate it well for firefighters. So what we're engaged in right now is a mass communication program, just to grossly simplify. So to put it bluntly, when you go out and visit a fire station, I don't really expect them to know much about the CRMP. I'm not entirely sure I'm that worried about them saying CRMP. What I need them to know is what they're doing in 2024 and 2025, the way we're underpinning that, and this is a different communication strategy that's ongoing and live, so it's not completely done. So I would wager if you went out tomorrow and talked about CRMP and asked them what the pillars and commitments, etc. are, they probably wouldn't know. What I do need them to know is the big things we're doing and why we're doing it, and then how they take those big things that we're doing at the corporate level and turn it into a better service in the communities they're looking after. And that's a different approach. Sometimes we get it right. I'm out on 2 or 3 fire stations a week. Sometimes I sit in rooms and I think, okay, we're going to have another go there and explain again. So I'll give you an example. So if you think about the scope of the CRMP, its breadth, sometimes my mind is slightly boggled by the scale of what we're delivering across effectively 9 programmes of work with multiple projects within. All I want firefighters to know about is what we're getting them to do in terms of their statutory duties, their response, what they're delivering, our service delivery out into communities, what we're doing for people and their skills to support that, and then what we're doing in terms of their equipment, the facilities that support them. They're the only 3 areas I want my firefighters to know about, along with the services we give London. whether in preparation, whether in recovery, whether in protecting them, London residents, whether preventing things happening to them, or obviously in our core duty response. That's it. So I don't expect them to talk about CRMP. I think I'm beginning to see that work, but it's early days because it is a new approach. And I'm actually really interested to see how that develops across this year. So I know we're going to get the opportunity to talk about what we're delivering within this plan coming forward. But throughout this meeting, I'm going to keep going back to those three areas because I know that firefighters listen to this. I know that members of the public listen to this. And really, that's how I want them to understand it. Whilst the plan stretches to 2029, and you as a committee will want to interrogate that in the context of both budget and aspiration, the real deal, because London's always changing, is what are we doing in 24, 25? Can we pay for it? Are we going to deliver it on time in a way that makes sense to firefighters so that they can deliver out into London better? We're not completely there yet. That's not how this works. But thank you for your politeness and support.
It might get worse, Commissioner.
Oh, no. I know.
Fiona, did you want to come in on that?
So I think most of the points have already been made. So the intent is for it to go from corporate level, which is right, it's a big organisation, it should have a sort of corporate strategy, down to community level within boroughs. I think that the point that people don't necessarily know it's a CRMP is different. In the past, people only knew what the London Safety Plan was in relation to cuts, and it's 10 years since we had the sort of cuts across the fire service this month as well. So I think, but when you do talk to firefighters, I do think that the ones I've spoken to most recently have actually recognised that the corporate level strategy is being translated for them and they can recognise it. And I think that that's a really big step in the right direction, so that every single member of the organisation, whether they're in a corporate team at Union Street or whether it's a fire station in inner London or outer London with their risks, can see it. And the other thing which we may come on to when we talk a bit more about borough resilience, borough risk management plans, is around the seasonal nature. So I've been really pleased to see that the borough level plans reflect the fact, because it's a plan on a page, it reflects the changing seasons. So you wouldn't have wildfire as a major risk in winter, but you may get floods all year round, and you may then, as you go into the spring, you may sort of get wildfire coming in some parts of London, but not necessarily in others. So it's much more responsive. It is about sort of translating that corporate overview to a very localised community level, and actually sort of reflecting the needs of the local communities in terms of what they need from the fire service and what risks are in the local community. And that means when they're having conversations with people locally, they should actually be talking about things that people living in the local area also understand is something that relates to them.
Assembly Member Polanski.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, panel. Commissioner, you've predicted my next question, which is specifically about delivery. So what projects are close to completion or are at completion? And are there any where you've had unexpected delays?
There's a lot across the piece, without sounding facetious, because the scale of change, and this is very real challenge. Part of the issue for LFB, if I start at the kind of strategic level, is managing people's capacity for change. And that's constantly shifting. So if you think so much of what we're doing ends up in one place, which is on a fire station, somewhere on Verona's patch or any other of the 33 borough commanders' patch, and there is a volume there that I think sometimes it actually is quite overwhelming for firefighters because of the pace and scale of it. So really, it's across the piece. So what are the things I think we're delivering successfully, and where are their challenges? So the things that are very much in my mind at the moment are pushing to complete the Grenfell Tower recommendations. So if you think about, again, testimony week, if you think about the phase 2 inquiry report coming, which I know will contain further scrutiny and challenge for LFB, and rightly so in the context of that night, I'm very focused on that. we're effectively at 28.5 out of 29 recommendations. I think we sent a document to the committee yesterday because I have, frustratingly, had to delay the completion of the final recommendation, which is the rollout of breathing apparatus. I have to say for the record that I'm very grateful for the support from my colleagues from the Fire Brigades Union, who alongside our own technical staff had picked up on a batch quality assurance issue within the face mask. Now, easily resolvable, but obviously almost every firefighter death on record has occurred wearing breathing apparatus, and if you're one of our nearly 5,000 firefighters who have to wear it, you have to have absolute confidence in that kit. So whilst we could have pushed, speaking frankly, just to get it over the line, to complete the recommendations and then publicly announce that, I think the FBU and our own technical team were right, that on the basis of that manufacturing issue, and I can assure the Assembly that the manufacturers have accepted full corporate and financial liability for this, and that within a day of having had the issue identified to us, we put in plan to resolve. We've decided to extend the completion date into March to give the workforce time on the ground to refamiliarise themselves, rebuild confidence. I'm very grateful because at Speed we've had full-time FBU officials and actually FBU regional health and safety officials seconded into the delivery team, but I won't compromise myself on this because it would be a massive disrespect to those who lost their lives that night not to do it properly, and it would be the greatest disrespect to firefighters. So I think that would be the most prominent one where we haven't quite met the deadline, but that is genuinely due to external factors I don't have control of, and we'll seek to address it. There's another part to the answer, but I'm aware you may well want to come back on that.
No, that'll make sense. Thank you. Fiona, Dolman. The Commissioner said, and I totally accept it, that the Fire Brigade don't necessarily need to, as in the firefighters don't need to understand the CRMP or quote the pillars, but also talked about this kind of culture weaving through. What work are you doing to make sure that reaches people on fire stations?
So must remember to press that button. There's an awful lot of work going on with borough commanders and with watch officers to translate the CRMP into the local borough risk management plans. They take the annual assessment of risk, which is our understanding of the risks in London, and they localise them. And they then develop their borough risk management plans. I'm going to steal a lot of your thunder if I'm not careful, with their local communities, which Verona can talk about, to make sure that they are relevant locally to the firefighters and the communities on the ground. As everyone has said, that for us, giving people a level of autonomy, giving them a level of control over what they need to deliver, the KPIs they need to focus on, that's quite a significant shift organisationally from KPIs that we tell people kind of a number of things they must do, and that number doesn't matter whether you're in Dalgate where you don't have many kind of residential accommodation, or you're in Croydon where you have an awful lot, for example. So helping them to be able to adjust their KPIs locally so that they're meeting their environment and focusing on the things they need to do rather than just chasing a number is a really significant shift for us. We're now starting to pilot station plans as well, which is a really simple plan on a page for each station, so they're really clear what they need to deliver and what success looks like for them in 2024. And that's really important for us because, again, quite a lot of the feedback we get from firefighters is this strategic plan is not relevant to me. So our job is to make sure it's absolutely relevant. We're doing something very similar across enabling departments across the organisation. So in 2 weeks' time, I think it is now, every enabling department will have its own plan on a page for 2024 that articulates the key things they have to deliver, whether that's business as usual, whether it's related to the CRMP, and so that everybody in that team is really, really clear about what they need to do in 2024 to help us to achieve our strategy, and so that it is transparent for the whole organisation. So everybody can see how everybody else is contributing to achieving our goals. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking to embed it all.
If I could just add to that's backed by a lot of really intensive face-to-face engagement, because again, one of the lessons I've learned is you can produce a nice corporate document, but I remember being a firefighter, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, this is a reality, looking at copies of LSP 5 propping up coffee tables. So, you know, there's shelves in fire stations with folders on that people haven't looked in. So that's not going to work for us. That's not our workforce. So you'll be aware, and actually it relates to your previous question, that we're doing an enormous amount of work around culture, about communicating our values into the workforce. Within that package of communication, we talk to the plan, because obviously the plan has to be underpinned by our values. So those three areas we're talking about, our service delivery, how we're supporting our people and skills, and then how we're enabling people through equipment and facilities, that is on the front of that presentation around values. That is being led by myself, the 2 deputy commissioners and other directors, face to face every week. I mean, I will have probably got across, I hate to think, because I'm out 2 or 3 times a week talking about it and delivering it. It's the same for the DEPs. They then get the opportunity, this is all our staff across both enabling departments and in fire stations, the opportunity to come back at it a second time through the Leadership Academy, who again talk about the plan and the values, and then they get to do it locally. So, and again, you can ask Ronnie whether that's happened or not. No pressure, Verona. Because that's the idea, is that we know that repetition is key for people to be able to ask questions and understand. So it's a really carefully considered communication strategy that is not predicated on kind of a corporate approach, but literally just sitting in rooms and saying, this is our plan, does it make sense to you, how are you going to deliver it locally, and by the way, this is the values that underpin it. So that's it in simple terms. That's how we're delivering.
Thank you. I do want to come to Verona and Gareth now, because obviously we've talked about how this is strategic stuff, but actually it really matters what's going on the ground. So should I come to you first, Verona?
So just remind me of exactly what it is you want me to...
That's a good question. I guess it's, how are your firefighters? How is the CRMP filtering through? Well, first of all, is it filtering through? Do you feel that they understand it? And if we take the Commissioner's presupposition that it doesn't matter if they understand it or not, is the kind of intention of it getting through?
Yes, absolutely. So the intention is getting through. Do they understand it, the ins and outs of every page? No, but I'm quite happy and comfortable that my staff within my borough don't need that, because actually the filter is there, and it's quite apt that we have our new values, and that learning piece is really being demonstrated, because we have the corporate strategic documents, which is absolutely appropriate. We're a public service, etc. But, my firefighters need to know what they need to deliver to meet the needs of their local community, and that is done through the Borough Risk Management Plan, which I own and which I'm implored and empowered to do and push forward to meet the needs of my residents. The risks that are in my borough are very specific to my borough. So absolutely I can adapt the training, I can adapt, that we engage with the local community, and I can make it very tailored to what my residents need, and then that can change. I can change it every quarter. I can develop things and change it so much easier than, if we just had one large corporate document, which wouldn't filter down. It doesn't filter down, to be honest with you, in that sense. But the Borough Risk Management Plan, and then the oncoming station plans, which again, finites it back down to, station level profiles, will allow me to do that, will allow my firefighters, my watch officers to, really tailor the needs to the community. And that is through the engagement that we do every day in Southwark Borough, and we can adapt to that change, and we do.
Thank you. I'm going to come on later on to ask you about specific risks. Gareth, so could I ask you more generally how your members are finding this? And also, Verona brought up their training. I'm wondering if you feel like the training's being adequately funded and they're getting the adequate training that you need.
Okay, I'm going to answer that in reverse. Training's never adequately funded. Okay, we need as much training all the time. This is a constantly evolving profession which needs to respond to societal risk and trend. Okay, and unfortunately sometimes due to budgetary constraints and the slower machinery that sometimes happens within organisations, we find ourselves in a more reactionary place. So I'm always going to say we need to be in a responsive place, and that takes focus on budget and general organisational focus. Now I'm not saying that that's lacking, but nonetheless that's going to be my answer there. In terms of how it translates to to firefighters, I mean, I suppose, to be really clear, on a fire station as a firefighter, if a colleague or peer of mine came into me talking about the community risk management plan, I'd do more than raise an eyebrow. I'd be going, interesting, where are we heading here in your career? So the reality is, what does it mean to them? And I think if I could capture it in one place, it's got to be about agility. I mentioned about it being an evolutionary profession. So the agility for frontline crews, first responders, practitioners, if you like, to be able to go out and see trends out in the communities, whatever they may well be, respective to their fire stations, which they can then take even more ownership and empowerment for, is really, really important. And that agility is factored in here. And what I need to see is that our members are aware that that agility is there for them. For example, we speak about the MSA set not coming out right on time. That is actually, if I'm honest, that's a good display of that agility. Yes, it took some work to get to that place, and it was a difficult decision for everybody to make. However, it underpins with the values that firefighter safety, and I think it was mentioned there about equipment and facilities under values. So if it had gone against that, we'd have blown this out of the water immediately. And as an FBU official, I would very much be questioning that. So yeah, I think it's in that space really. It allows the crews to focus. Are they yet fully aware of what it allows them to do? No, I wouldn't say they are. And it's going to take some time for that to translate, and it's going to mean people being proactive out in Borough. Borough commanders are really, really pivotal, but firefighters are even more pivotal. And the problem is, because we're a hierarchy, we can't help it. We're a bit of an institution, and we have this hierarchical top-down approach. And actually, we really do need to listen to the newest entrants to the service, because they come with a completely different outlook. Actually, they come with a whole different skill set. And what I might have in experience, I might not necessarily have in societal experience that they've got. So to become a really agile organisation, we need to come away from that sort of mindset of, I've been here for 20 years, I'm this person, I've got this much rank or responsibility, and we need to step into a space where it's, okay, your voice is heard, and we understand what you've seen and what's out there, and we can then respond to it proportionately. So kind of a long answer, but nonetheless, it's about that agility for me.
I thought it was a great answer, not that you're asking for feedback, but when we're talking about things going down, it just feels a bit like it's going through rather than down, but that's struggling with the hierarchy maybe. Yeah,
and I'd just say with that hierarchy, I mean, what do I know that a 21-year-old, when I joined at sort of wherever it was at 21, I had a very different outlook to the world. I had a very different outlook about what society looked like. I understood things that I do not understand now. And so then how can I actually make a decision on those things, especially as a trade union official? How can I actually reflect those voices if I don't listen to them? So all organisations need to learn to listen, because I think that's, the difficult conversations, as hard as they are to have and as threatening as they can be to people, are really how we're going to evolve as a city and an organisation.
Thank you. Finally, you talked about agility there, and we talked about training and funding. I don't want to dive too much into funding because I'll set off my Labour and Conservative colleagues again. But in terms of agility with training, the Babcock training contract, do you feel like that's agile enough to match the agility you're looking for?
Let me think. I think it's got some work to do.
Right.
Yeah, I think. To be fair, the way that the Babcock contracts are set up nationally, there's some work to be done. In-house training is always going to be our preference, because of the fact that we can respond. We feel like we can be more responsive. So if something's happened out on the incident ground, or we pick up a trend, we can feed it straight back in, and therefore we're able to then factor that into training quite quickly without having to go through various plans, bits, pieces. It's more about an instructor putting together a lesson plan, and we know we've got that confidence. From an FBU perspective, it's that agility and speed that we want, because if something happens in another fire service area and we don't know about it, or worse still, we do know about it and we can't respond to it because we're caught up within whatever structures have been put in place, and let's be clear, those structures were left in place. They're something that the current commission has picked up. If we can't do that, then we're not really doing the best by our members, are we? And so that will negate some of that agility without a shadow of a doubt.
Makes sense. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
We're now going to go to Assemblymember Cooper, who's joining us online to ask questions specifically about funding.
Yes, you would have certainly set me off if you'd gone off into funding discussions there, Assemblymember Polanski. I want to ask wider questions about funding, not just about funding for training, if that's okay. And I'd like to start with the Deputy Mayor and I'm sure the Fire Commissioner will want to come in as well. So, Fiona, just looking at the budget overall, would you say that the Fire Service has secured enough funding in the 24-25 budget to deliver all of the projects and commitments in the Community Risk Management Plan that you're hoping to undertake in the next year?
Well, the mayors continue to provide the LFB with the funding they need, but he is proposing to increase the funding by 23 million in the coming financial year. And it's a balance, isn't it? We've got a balanced budget that's been proposed. So to that extent, we've got plans in place, and we've got the finance identified to do that. And I think that I found the exchange at the beginning quite interesting, because obviously I also feel that sort of that there is a question nationally, not just relating to LFB, about what does the fire service nationally need to deal with emerging risks, whether that's wildfire or flooding or lithium-ion batteries. So I think that the government does have a part to play in looking at sort of whether that is sufficiently funded, but equally over the next year we have identified funds for all the work that is in the plan for next year.
Thank you. I'll just come on to you then, Andy, because I noticed Fiona just referred to the 22 million. I think that's planned to come from the reserves that exist at the moment. So does the delivery of the Community Risk Management Plan currently depend on the use of those LFB reserves? And I think it's interesting looking at these new areas of danger that the call outs to e-bikes and e-scooters has gone off the planet really in terms of numbers. So I just wondered what commitments you have secured from either the mayor or from government that they will provide funding for the implementation of the Community Risk Management Plan once reserves have gone, because obviously you can only dip into reserves a certain number of times, can't you?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think the first thing I'd say is that we're well supported by the Mayor and the Greater London Assembly in terms of our resourcing and budget. I think, you can play games with this, but the truth is we are. So where we've made a good business case for change, we've been well supported. I mean, we have costed the CRMP. The CRMP is budgeted. It'd be irresponsible otherwise. But like all big public sector organisations, we work in a budget planning cycle that basically looks a year ahead or 2 years ahead into the medium term. And we're confident that we can deliver on that basis through the proper use of reserves. I think sometimes, there's a kind of political debate around reserves which doesn't point to the reality of it, which is appropriate use of earmarked reserves to deliver change is entirely right. And you do that before you seek longer term revenue funding. What we're really clear about, so I'll give you an example, I'll give you some of the numbers. If you think about the CRMP, it's £10.9 million of new investment specifically for the CRMP programmes within 24-25. We are using reserves to cover that in the first instance because that is appropriate to do so. I've been very clear into the Budget and Performance Committee and directly to the Mayor, and if we think about fire safety where we do receive direct Home Office grants, I've been clear to all stakeholders in that piece that to continue the work in a number of areas, we will need revenue investment moving forward, along with judicious future use of earmarked reserve and making our own efficiencies, which is what a well-run authority does, I would suggest. I've had nothing other than support, but obviously I don't get confirmation because of the nature of budget planning cycles. So actually, I don't hold a great deal of anxiety. Because again, I think to give credit to colleagues across the political spectrum, perhaps it does go back to last week and my experiences last week. I think you can see what happens if you don't make that investment, which is Grenfell, actually. It's in kind of the kind of risks that firefighters faced on Monday night. So I think we make the case well for the investment that needs to be delivered. It's my responsibility to deliver it properly and not overstate that case. So I think the answer, Assembly Member Cooper, is yes, I am confident we will continue to receive the funding we need. If there's a single variable within that, which is outside of the control of both the Greater London Authority, actually central government as well, and ourselves, it is, of course, pay. And we are in national negotiations around pay, and we will have to take that into account because a significant part of our budget is related to pay. But we, again, have started early discussions with all stakeholders, you know, both colleagues in the Fire Brigades Union, colleagues within the National Fire Service, government and the GLA as to the possible impact of that. I will not give an answer that compromises negotiations in this committee, and it would be wrong to do so because that is a national process that has to play out, but that is also in our thinking. So I raise that point merely to kind of give you some reassurance that we're thinking about all of the different variables within the budget and our kind of necessity to deliver against a plan which I think is key to mitigating the risks that are laid out, and the operational risk assessment underpins it.
Thanks for that, Andy. No, I too am keen to steer clear of getting involved in the fire brigades pay negotiations. So I'm going to leave that to you and the FBU to continue. I'm just asking about the overall funding availability for the implementation of the community risk management plan. So it sounds as though we're definitely sorted and funded for 24-25 with the judicious use of the reserves, which I appreciate you saying that. But I just wondered if you are saying that you need to secure additional funding for future years, because obviously, as I pointed out at the beginning, reserves are finite, and if you're unable to get that sort of uplift in terms of additional funding, you know, particularly with these new things, lithium-ion batteries that explode and thermal runaway that firefighters are having to deal with, as well as you know, the other issues. Do you think that if you don't get that additional funding, that it might undermine the implementation in future years of the community risk management plan?
I'd rather approach this answer in a different way, which is I have an expectation that we'll secure that funding, because everything I've heard from the Mayor particularly and the Deputy Mayor is that they agree with our plan in relation to training, because that's where we really need longer term revenue funding to kind of build on what our use of reserves starts. So putting it in a way that you'll understand, basically what Gareth has raised is right. We have to continue to improve our training offer because of the changes in risk in London. How are we actually going to do that? Well, it's everything from making sure that you train as watches all together rather than as individuals. We do that on your day duties so that we then backfill to ensure that we've got operational cover, so that has a cost. We're sending every single firefighter in London, outside of London, into a much more challenging real fire training environment, because emission rules in London don't allow us to do an open burn. Again, because of you know dense urban communities, it wouldn't be right. Actually, it would be bad for their health. We're paying for that through the use of reserve in the first 2 years. Both the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor are clear they support this, and they know that there will be an increased revenue cost moving forward, because we have been equally clear about that in our budget planning for future years. I don't see a place where we stop that. I'm very confident from the track record of both the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor that we will secure that, because they understand that it underpins and meets an operational risk. But I think it is appropriate at the moment, because the Mayor is setting his budget for obviously the year coming, and with anticipation of the year beyond that, that we prove that we can pay for it in that term, and then we will return to it within subsequent budget planning cycles. You will hear me be equally clear in that budget planning cycle that I need that revenue funding to ensure I maintain the quality of training for firefighters. I have not had disagreement from anyone in either central government nor from the GLA, to be fair, all of whom have been part of the discussions around how we need to improve our training offer, particularly in relation to the Grenfell Tower inquiry recommendations. That makes me think I won't be able to secure that.
Well, I like your confidence, and I really hope that everybody around this table and also in central government and anywhere else agrees that we need kit that is of the highest quality. And I listened to your answer about the face masks that you were forced to reject, but we're going to get the ones that work. We need kit that is fit for purpose. We need well-trained fire officers, and of course we also need people who are remunerated to a level that is commensurate with the duties that they undertake and also helps with our retention of firefighters in the service. I'm going to hand back to the Chair now. Thank you very much for those answers.
Thank you. Assembly Member Boff.
Commissioner, it's reserves. The 20 million is reserves. So we can't spend that again. That's correct, isn't it? Mr. Cook, you said earlier that training is never adequately funded. Doesn't it worry you that the Mayor is spending 24 million on an election sweetener on discount Fridays rather than using those funds to keep Londoners safe in the future?
Wow. Sounds like you're trying to trip me up there, Mr. Boff.
It's what this question is about, Mr. Cook, is about a sense of priorities. It's about keeping Londoners safe or keeping a few people happy. And that's the real question.
Just to clarify, you do not need to answer this question. This is so he can make a little social media video.
I think the question of prioritising safety over an election bribe, I think is a very important question. But you can choose not to, but don't feel as though you're being instructed.
Mr. Boff, please, in the benefits of democracy, I'd like to answer.
Thank you, sir.
I think, basically, as a trade union official, I'm obviously going to go straight to the point of that I need the fire service funded correctly and proportionately. As a Londoner, as a resident of London, and someone who's risked his life for 27 years protecting the people of London, absolutely. I do also recognise, having spent time in the capital only last Friday, there's no one around. So how are we to get business revenue, make sure that our protection's correct and all the levels are correct and proportionate when we haven't got the visitors that we used to have? Just to put it into perspective, 1997 I joined the job. We had 6,600 operational firefighters. We had around, don't quote me on this of course because my figures are very rough, we had around, I think it was 6 million London residents. We now have around 5,000-ish operational firefighters and we've got 9 million residents. So are we in a place now where we're as, if you like, as focused on the protection of London and Londoners as we were then? I don't know. I haven't got the answer to that question. In terms of what the Mayor's doing with regards to travel and trying to get people back into the capital and making sure that's happening, again, as a Londoner, I'll give you an answer, but as a trade union official, it's probably not my business.
OK, thank you so much for that. But do you not think it is important, if we're dealing with the training, which you've said is never adequately funding, that we need to have a more long-term approach to training than we currently have?
Mr. Boff, that's what the CRMP is, which I think is perfect, because that gives us an overview of how we're going to approach that, and I might add, how we're going to work toward that.
And a long-term funding for that CRMP is vital, surely, to that plan's success, is it not?
And whilst I agree with you there, I'll come back to central government funding as well.
Yes.
So we've kind of done a full circle there in many ways. Yeah. Central government funding to the Fire and Rescue Service is imperative to the basics, the training, and what we're looking at to make sure that our firefighters are as safe as they can be. As I've already mentioned, we've got a smaller number of firefighters now and a greater number of residents and visitors than we used to have. So they're also more stretched. So they're more stretched, that there's more of a capacity issue. Now, our communities are bigger, they're more diverse, there's greater demand, there's this huge evolution of change, as we've discussed. Lithium-ion batteries just came up. We have to respond to that proportionately. Nobody saw that one coming 5 years ago. We didn't think lithium-ion batteries was a thing. On the 14th of June 2017, when I looked up at the tower that the Commissioner was at and sent him a picture of that tower on fire, I thought that was scaffold netting, because I had no concept that cladding was going to be the case. Now, I was a training officer at that point in the northwest area, and I didn't know, and I was plugged into training. My point is this. As I mentioned earlier, it's an evolutionary profession. So whilst we can take a point of, is the Mayor spending money here, is the Mayor spending money there, and I totally appreciate that that's your political point. My point, as an elected official of the trade union, for members of the firefighters, and as you said, you're related to one, who take these incredible risks, and they're really everyday normal people. These are the people you stand next to at the bus stop. These are the people with all the worries and all the concerns about the cost of living crisis in London. These are people with all the concerns and all the worries, but they take it home with them at night, and now bombarded with social media because they don't get any space away from the incident, so we've got all the psychological well-being issues that we've got. Those are the people I'm here for, and those are the people I care for, and I will always ask for more funding for them, and I will always ask for more agility. The CRMP gives us some space to work that agility into what we do. But as a trade union official, I'm always going to ask for more funding. Why wouldn't I?
Absolutely. And I don't disagree with anything you've said, Mr. Cook. I just think if there's money available and it's easily accessible, wouldn't you use that?
Sure. Okay. Moving on. Sorry. Assembly Member Lord Bailey, key performance indicators.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, panel, and I want to talk about key performance indicators. Just to carry on, Mr. Cook, just slightly. You talked about the number of firefighters versus the population. What's the ratio of fires versus the number of firefighters? Because it would strike me that we have slightly better technology than we may have had back then. And so are we? Is that comparison a useful one, or are there better comparisons?
Lord Bailey, sorry, I'm never going to be able to answer that question without some preparation, at least not authentically and not accurately.
Okay, fair enough. You don't have to, because I'm about to ask about KPIs, and the ultimate thing is fires, isn't it? You know, how we deal with these fires. But if the Commissioner feels like he could give a stab, that'd be great.
I can. So we have, over a very long period, seen a drop in fires and fire deaths. And we're talking about the long arc of kind of history here. So we're going back 20 years. So without a doubt, we saw over a period of a decade a considerable drop in fires in London. But that has plateaued for a very, very long time. And what I would say, and we're increasingly referring to the data to inform our approach, is that those fires now occur in a far more complex, higher risk, densely populated and multi-risked environment. So it's not about the numbers, it's about the potential of everything from a single catastrophic event like Grenfell or a tram crash, or very widespread kind of disastrous events like the wildfires. The risk profile is continuously changing. So to compare it just in terms of numbers to the London of 25 years ago, I think is a mistake. And I'm afraid I think it was a mistake in London to plan on that basis over a decade. I think it informed a lack of investment, because we told ourselves as a sector, I'm afraid people who sat in my seat previously told previous iterations of this committee that prevention and protection were going to solve this. They do not. Not in a city of this size, with this complexity, with this risk, with this continuously evolving risk profile. They do not. They have a very important place. They have helped, and it's been an amazing success story for the National Fire Service and London, that we have done something there to reduce risk in communities, but you cannot be complacent in that space. So actually, if you want to ask my opinion, we have enough firefighters in London currently set against the risk, because we plan our CRMP in a way that takes our statutory responsibilities very seriously, because I've seen too many people's personal tragedies not to take that seriously firsthand. You know, I have picked up the bodies of Londoners, as has Gareth, as has Verona. So I think we have the right number of firefighters now, but I would never rule out the possibility that I would come to the Mayor nor central government to ask for more if I thought I needed it, because I would not be cavalier enough to do so, having seen the terrible end results of what I think was a process of erosion and disinvestment over many years, both in respect to training, enabling services, not so much the numbers in response, but certainly in terms of some of our specialist appliances and what we could use, you know, there and then. And I think we see the end results of that at Grenfell. So my position is we have enough firefighters for now set against the risk. I do need to continue to invest in training, because I see it as an area of vulnerability, because we're building from a base that I'm not comfortable with, although we have already made great change. I think we have to deal with our specialist response and think about how that needs to evolve, everything from our aerial appliances to our specialist technical rescue to how we work in a flood or wildfire environment. So the answer is more complicated than just numbers of fires, numbers of firefighters. It's about how we balance the resources we have with, a particular focus on where the risk is. And I'm just going to say this as Commissioner, I want to depoliticise that, because the sharp reminder to me last week, is that where we get that wrong, you end up witnessing the destruction of a community and a way of life I recognise. You see incredible personal loss. And I think my job is just to state it as I see it, set against that risk. And I have to say, credit to everyone from Sadiq Khan to Michael Gove and the Deputy Mayor who were there in that room last week with me. I think there is a recognition that you should expect your senior public servants to come to you and express themselves with that candour and that request for appropriate investment without acting recklessly or justifying waste. I welcome your question, though. It's a very good question. I just felt it deserved a full answer.
And I welcome your answer, because I think some of the conversation around cuts, etc., has been clumsy and been political, and you've given quite a good background to what actually went on, and I really appreciate that. Because for me, the KPIs are important. We do need to understand if the CRMP is going to make some impact. So I'm going to read this question, and you all come back with your answer in the context of what the Commissioner just said. What has been what has the first year the CRMP KPI shown you? What's it shown you that you're doing well, and what's it shown you that you're struggling with? If I can start with Fiona, please, and then I'll go on. Oh, sorry, this Fiona. So there's no chance I can read your sign from here. It's just my eyes cannot do that.
No problem at all. Okay, so it's a great question, and you're absolutely right. The KPIs are designed to be a reflection of the changes that we're making to the way we work in the organisation. So they should tell us the extent to which those changes are being successful.
Yeah.
And there are a high number of KPIs where we are doing really, really well. There are a couple that we find particularly challenging, and I'm quite happy to talk you through those couple. The first one is the ratio of high-risk audits that we're able to complete. So we have a target of completing 60% of high-risk audits on time. We're delivering around 42%. That doesn't take away from the lower-risk audits that we're also delivering, which is the other 40%, if you see what I mean. There are some issues here that we've been working through for quite some time. So our performance is particularly impacted by an increasing national skill shortage in terms of really specialist, highly qualified fire safety inspectors.
Okay.
Our turnover is around 15% because we cannot compete with the private sector, and in some cases other public sector organisations as well. They recruit smaller numbers but they pay more, whereas we need more. Okay. What we've done to seek to address that is we set up an academy to enable us to train people to become fire safety inspectors. It's about 2.5 years to become a fully qualified, competent fire safety inspector. So that's significant investment organisationally. We've trained more inspectors over the last couple of years than any other organisation. Our problem is they then go. So,
yeah, I was going to say, do you hold on? So let me just quickly ask a question on that very specific thing. Yeah. So, do you pay for their training? Do you pay for it? So, are you able to ask them to stay a certain amount of time because you pay? Is that something you do?
Contractually, we've explored that, but it would have to be negotiated because many are actually uniformed officers working within a grey book role. There's some challenges in any sort of retention calls within an employment contract. And actually, just putting it bluntly, were we to get them to repay their training costs, you might find that the private sector employers who are recruiting them would simply price that into the recruitment.
Just pay it, okay.
What I would say, again, coming back to our previous conversation, because I think it's easy to assume this isn't particularly a question of money for us, because actually we've had good support both from central government and the GLA in this space. So they support us, for example, using the Central Home Office funding around this to both pay for extended training and support us offering a market rate supplement, which we have. The GLA have supported us in the context of abatement, so that's making sure that we deal with the very specific rules that relate to uniform staff around pension abatement, so we retain staff who otherwise would be financially disadvantaged. So it's not the financial support, it's actually the ability to recruit people into the space. and we're more successful than any other organisation in the country. What it does point to, and I've raised this directly, so I'm not speaking out of turn here, with both Secretary of State and senior officials in DLUC, is we have no proper framework for education around fire safety inspection and fire engineering in the country. This is a job you can earn an enormous amount of money in the private sector. So I find it perplexing that at least one university tried to shut its course down last year, and it's only with persuasion from the sector that we kept it open. So I feel like there needs to be some help from central government to really recognise that, just like some vital skills inside the NHS, we've both got to advertise it better and incentivise it better, because actually it's a really, really good career. And once people get in it, they can see they've got amazing opportunities both in the public and private sector. I do feel we're making headway there, but it's going to be a constant struggle because they're in demand. They've set up a new building safety regulator, quite rightly, following the recommendations that arose from the Grenfell Tower inquiry. The very regulator that I am contracted to support is also, putting it bluntly, recruiting our staff. The very people I have to enforce against are recruiting my staff. So we're in just this constant cycle. It's a particularly challenging KPI, and it all comes down to that, because it's just about how many people have you got to do something that is a high-risk, complex technical task that, you get into a big, multi-storey residential building with a parking garage underneath. You could be 2 days looking at that. So it's just a capacity and people issue. It's not so much the money, but very, very challenging, and one that I think we will continue to struggle to deliver on until we crack that both nationally and regionally.
But from a KPI point of view, your story is slightly tragic from a professional point of view, but from a KPI point of view, it's actually very good, because you have the mechanisms that are looking at where your challenges lie, and they're highlighting them early, and then you're able to hopefully work them out. I want to take a slightly different, I'm going to keep on Fiona here. Are you content that your current set of KPIs are effectively measuring performance both quantitatively and qualitatively as well?
That's a very good question. Most of our KPIs are quantitative. That's a word I can't say as well.
Yeah.
Are quantitative.
Yeah.
The ones that are more qualitative in nature are relating to community.
Okay.
And sentiment analysis, essentially, of how the community feels about the service that we provide. So there's a balance there. Most of our KPIs are quantitative in nature, because we're looking for a performance improvement as a result of them. Yeah. So that's primarily what we focused on. Okay.
And have you received feedback from your members on their views around the KPIs and the changes introduced to KPI reporting? Gareth as well, coming and Verona as well, but just Fiona, have you are people happy about these new KPIs? Are they complicated? Do they think they're necessary, unnecessary?
Again, I think that's a really good question. I think there's a combination of there's a level of relief in the organisation about the way that we have put the KPIs together and the way that they then flow through to the borough risk management plans, because we're looking at percentage shifts primarily rather than numbers.
Okay.
So if I were to say, percentage of time spent on protection activity, percentage of time spent on prevention activity, rather than number of activities that you undertook. So for firefighters particularly, firefighters that I've spoken to across many stations feel that's the considerable step forward, because they can then focus locally on how does this relate to what we need to do in our local environment, rather than how on earth am I going to find that many homes to visit in a borough that doesn't have that number, So as far as I can tell, it's being received positively. As I say, there's still work to do on a number of them. We're not delivering all of them yet, but they are deliberately challenging to push us as an organisation.
Okay. Gareth, are your members enjoying this?
Well, look, from my perspective, on behalf of the members, KPIs. Okay, so it's nice to have a boundary, practical thing for people to work with. Ultimately, like firefighters are practitioners, and they are practical. Okay, so it's nice for that to be there. I'm not a greatest fan of KPIs. I've lived through periods of time where we've looked at, was a fire death in a house that was alight. If somebody died in a different room to the seat of fire, then that wasn't classed as a fire death. I've been through that. I've lived through that experience. So yes, it needs to be there. Is it helpful? It gives people something to work with, and the officers and leaders within the organisation very much need that. From my perspective as a humanitarian, I want to see what it actually does, and that's the part which I'll get the feedback from the membership, especially when they'll come and say, look, we've made a massive difference here. Verona may come back and say, look, that's brilliant. We've had this has happened within my borough, and I was able to act really quickly, very proportionately, and really in a targeted way to keep London and Londoners safe. That's what I'm looking for.
So you're more interested in the qualitative stuff?
Absolutely. I'm not going to say the word because I might struggle with it. But no, absolutely. The qualitative stuff, I did it. The quality, I'll do it again. No, I nearly went wrong there trying to try it twice. But in that space, for us, it's what, you know, what gives us the most satisfaction out there of doing our job is actually helping people. My officers, the leaders, the members that are leading that need to know that they've got themselves in a good space. So KPI is absolutely important. But we've also been through periods of time where turn everything green, you know. And so therefore I've had people operating within a space where I go, well, we just need to do 20 of these. Is that any help? You know, and we need to target the most vulnerable people within society. We need to be able to do things with that and feed that back in, like I spoke earlier about trending. So, long answer, probably not as direct as you'd like, but KPIs are important. But from the Fire Brigades Union perspective, when we see tangible change out in the operational arena, on the front line, if you like, the communities that we all serve, okay, that's what we're looking for. So KPIs are important, but I've also seen them used in negative ways, in ways to hit people over the head with a stick with when it's not been done correctly or it hasn't reached something. And as you spoke about quality, there's no quality in there. That's just a box ticking exercise. So that's the humanitarian answer that you'll get from a Fire Brigades Union member, I'd hope.
Verona, I want to ask you a slightly different question. Has it made for more work for you, and if so, is it helpful, or could you be doing other things with that energy, you know, returning these KPIs?
I wouldn't say it's made more work for firefighters. What it's done because of the borough risk management plan is it's allowed me to tailor it. So, for example, you know, everybody had a blanket. You must get 11 home fire safety visits a week, etc. You know, I can tailor that into my borough to go specifically. This is it. I don't need 10 in my borough. 11 in my borough to meet targets anymore in that sense, because it is about the quality. You know, some of the residents in my borough need that time to spend, an hour, if need be, with a resident to really go through, talk through fire safety, talk through, through fire safety checks and things like that. Actually, it is more about the quality. And, echoing what Gareth has said, we understand and we appreciate why we've got targets. As I said earlier, public service, we must answer to the public and be able to constitute and prove the work that we're doing. However, for firefighters, and I'll include myself on that quality time with our residents, with our local community, and getting them to understand the risk, why they're risks, and how we can help bring those risks down together is much more important.
Okay, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So I'm going to put forward an unpopular view probably among some people. I love KPIs. I think that if you didn't have KPIs, how am I supposed to identify which areas we need to particularly push on, scrutinise, go back round, have a deep dive on, have a paper on, have a discussion on? So I think for me, it's about having intelligent KPIs, which goes to the heart of some of the changes they've had around the home fire safety visits, where actually I think the Borough Commander is entirely right. Previously it was like tick, 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 we've done all these home fire safety visits. Have they been with the most vulnerable people? No, not always, because people have been like, we've got to get the target, we've got to get the numbers up. So I think that you've now got a target that's being consulted on for 60% high-risk home fire safety visits, reflecting the concerns of the inspectorate at the previous inspection, to sort of say you've actually got to focus on the people that need it most. Those people that, as Verona said, need a bit more time. Would I want to see a whole page of green on KPIs? Absolutely not, because we know the organisation will have areas that need to focus on. If it was all green, you'd ask about why have you set them so low? So I think that it's about intelligent use of KPIs that I can use, that the Commissioner and his staff can use to identify the areas that need a little bit more attention as we work through the transformation. Will they all be perfect at this point? No, they'll need tweaking, they'll need adjusting, and I think the new approach that Fiona Dolman and her team's introduced means that you can do that. You can you can adjust the target, so when they meet a target, we're going to have that same target for 5 years. No, we're going to sort of move it so that you sort of raise the bar. Is that going to be tough for staff? They might feel a little bit like, well, we've sort of got to the top of a hill and you're sort of saying there's another peak further on. Absolutely, yes. So I think that there's a whole range of ways that we can use KPIs, but for me, I wouldn't be able to do my job of scrutinising and challenging the LFB as part of their transformation if we didn't have intelligent KPIs. And I think we've got much better set of KPIs now than we did have a few years ago.
Just before I bring the Deputy Mayor, I appreciate your answers because you're showing the scope of the reality of, you know, from Gareth to Deputy Mayor. That's a kind of what I'd expect. If you see what I mean. Just a quick question to Fiona. When are you next going to review the KPIs that you have?
Sure. So we've been doing that over the last couple of months, and our commitment is that we will do it every year. So okay. We've been through a lot of detailed consultation and engagement with the people that own the KPIs, and we've been working through with our staff. We're doing informal consultation with the Deputy Mayor in the next couple of weeks, and we'd like to come and talk to you guys about it informally as well and talk you through where we're going with the KPIs for the next financial year. So it goes back to the Deputy Mayor's point around these are not KPIs, these are not targets rather, that will stay static for 5-7 years. They are going to get adjusted to reflect what we understand better about our environment and where we believe we can challenge ourselves differently.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Commissioner, sorry?
No problem. It is a good question because you can see the range of kind of responses it's given you. I would argue that we do, within the KPIs, refer to the quality of what we're delivering as well, because you will see that in our quarterly reporting, there is not a KPI we report on that doesn't have a narrative underneath it. That's right. Because the number is just the starting point, both for scrutiny and also for understanding. So, for example, the answer we gave around high-risk audits, obviously, if you look at a number, you don't really know why we're not meeting a 60% target. I am mandated to provide a narrative. The flip side of KPIs is proper organisational assurance as well, because you're absolutely right, as a scrutiny committee, where I think we didn't have a proper enterprise assurance framework in the past. So when I took over in 2020, I did not have an assurance framework as an organisation of our size in London, critical emergency service. How could we possibly give you the information you need to be able to challenge us and understand what's going on, or for me to understand as the leader of that organisation what's going on underneath the surface? So the flip side of KPIs, which I think I'm required to bring to you as well, is the results of both internal and external assurance, whether it's within those 3 lines of assurance, you know, our first line manager reporting, they're the things that kind of give us that initial starting point for the narrative that explains how we're doing, whether it's our internal assurance function that gets out there and sense checks just how we're doing on those high risk audits, because actually you're right, even if we have got all these challenges, you know, in the fire safety workforce, so actually does that pressure mean we're not even delivering those audits very well? How does that audit actually get carried out in that person's business or residence? It's reporting honestly about what the inspectorate discover, which they're going to do anyway, because we're one of the most heavily scrutinised services in the country, and it's about MOPAC, who again work as another audit function. So I think alongside the KPIs, and that's why it's a good question, we need to bring in a full suite of information, which is this is what we're aiming to achieve. The numbers tell you this much. The narrative that articulates whether we've met or not is this. Here's some examples of where we're doing it well or where we're not. And here's what others outside of the London Fire Brigade think of us as well. You know, what did the inspectorate think when they come in and look at those numbers?
That's one of the key things, because if you look at that Fire Brigade, it was in quite a bad state. And the reason it got there is because there wasn't KPIs for people to look at and say, hold on, what had really happened here? So that's why I appreciate where Gareth is coming from, because the people who have to deliver the KPIs are interested in actually people, outcomes, how does it feel when on the ground. But the Deputy Mayor, of course, and yourself, Commissioner, and the organisation are very focused on what are we actually doing in the places that I can't physically visit. So, but I'm going to go back to the Chair because she's under pressure for time. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, right. Just being slightly mindful of time. We've about another hour of questions. What I propose we do is we have some questions from Assemblymember Rogers on consultation. I propose we take those and then we take a 5-minute comfort break. Sounds good.
Sure.
Okay. Assemblymember Rogers.
Thank you, Chair. Some questions around the consultation. Starting with yourself, Andy. What were the key learning points from the initial engagement and consultation in 2021, and how did those learning points influence the consultation in 2022?
So obviously we consulted with a very, very wide range of stakeholders, and to be honest with you, we got something different from every single one of those. So if we think about yourselves, obviously we've already talked about the 19 points you had made. If we think about our own staff, it was about the accessibility of the plan and the points I think that's been very well made here, which is how do you articulate that plan in a way that makes sense to firefighters. It was about hearing very loud and clear from both community and firefighters, particularly this desire for localism. You know, localism is a bit of a corporate word, isn't it? But a desire to own the plan, having enough of top-down plans, not really understanding how it could make sense specifically, as you know, as Verona has talked really compellingly about, to local risk. So I think in the first iteration, on the basis of the consultation we had to go back and look at how we express that more simply, with a greater level of devolved kind of empowerment. Again, you know, it's a bit of a corporate word, isn't it? But letting people do their job, basically, and how that was expressed within the plan. The plan was flexible enough to deliver that. Really focusing, again, and it's another fashionable phrase, isn't it? Co-production, but actually getting people who are actually doing the job to write a plan for you is what that really means. And realising we hadn't, through the first consultation, quite, despite the good intent, got that completely right, and therefore taking the decision to go back out again, to cast the net wider, to go back round into further focus groups, back out to fire stations, back into communities and try and understand it. And that really was everyone from, again, if I think about, you know, colleagues in the Grenfell community to, you know, people who had suffered smaller tragedies to, well, everything from kind of action groups within London to residents' associations to local authorities. So, I mean, that would be my answer, really, was that the feedback was diverse. We listened and we amended the plan accordingly. And the big point was recognising the increasing complexity of London, the desire to deliver things locally and give people the power to do so, and really reflect that in a simple way that makes sense to the people who actually deliver our service, you know, rather than me, basically.
Thank you. Fiona, anything to add to that point, to that question? No.
No, I don't think so. I think you've covered it.
Good. Thank you. Well, actually, a question for you then, Fiona. You did a gap analysis of the initial consultation and identified some hard to reach groups, including people who are unemployed or on low incomes, people with disabilities, not employment, and a number of other groups as well. What actions did you take to engage with those particular groups that you identified in that gap analysis?
That's a good question, thank you. So we went through an awful lot of focus groups with different underrepresented, it's another word I can't say, underrepresented groups. We worked with Certitude London, helping us get closer to adults with learning disabilities, autism, mental health needs. We worked with Hoarding UK. We worked with the deaf community. A number of different tenant groups, and with East London Mosque amongst others, as well as Andy has already mentioned, the Grenfell Tower community group. So we worked with an awful lot of different communities. We must recognise that Donna Peters led an awful lot of that, and fair credit to her for helping us so amazingly with all of this. But we worked in a very detailed way. We looked at digital targeting as well, and we also worked with the Consultation Institute to make sure that we were really embracing good practice and getting to as many communities as we could.
Okay. And are you satisfied that you engaged with a sufficient breadth of Londoners in this consultation? And also an additional question to that would be, did you draw any further learning points from the 2022 consultation that you'll apply to future consultations?
If I could get perhaps Fiona to answer the second point, what I would say honestly to the first point is you can always do better. Yep. It's quite hard to get Londoners to engage with corporate documents. So whilst we had formal responses, I think we had 2,239 responses formally to consultation, which is one of the highest, I mean, it's a bit sad to say, isn't it, in the context of the population, one of the highest response rates we've had to a consultation. It is actually a measure of success and like really highly energised communication. We got to that point. Obviously, there were loads and loads of informal responses within the focus groups, sitting down with communities, sitting with firefighters that weren't codified in that kind of formal record. So it's much broader than that. But I'd always like to do better, you know, because this is a huge city with so many communities within it. So to sit here and say, oh, yeah, I'm satisfied. No, I don't think it's my job to be satisfied. That's not the game, is it? So I would say that there was a disproportionate response rate from over 45s. There always does tend to be. In this sort of exercise, under 25s were underrepresented. That's a shame because London is young, and you know we've got to find a better way of getting to them next time. 70% described themselves as straight or heterosexual. 21% reported that their day-to-day activities were limited to some extent by a disability or health problem. Over 60% respondents identified as British. So we have segregated responses very carefully to try and understand where do we need to do better? And actually that focuses a lot of our current effort, both locally and strategically, into community engagement and trying to get to people who are seldom heard, because that's very often where risk and vulnerability lies as well. So, I mean, was there anything you'd like to add about the 2022 consultation that we'll take forward into future planning in terms of annual review of CRMP?
Yeah, there's probably a couple of things. So what was really clear from the consultation was people's view of us as a fire and rescue service have changed. And it's not just about, whilst everybody wants the fire engine to turn up very, very quickly, it's not just about that in terms of what people expect from us as a service. What they're really looking for is for us to help them prepare should the worst happen, and for us to be there to help them recover. So part of our work and our kind of building on the CRMP from that second consultation was bringing in 3 new strategies. So we have the statutory, another word I can't say, statutory duties of protect, prevent and respond. We brought in 3 new strategies of prepare, recover and engage. And we're working through and developing prepare and recover at the moment, and an engagement strategy is in place now. But they were things that were clearly wanted from the communities of London.
That's interesting. So as the work of the London Fire Brigade is itself changing and evolving, people's understanding of that work is also changing and evolving.
Yeah, and that's a reality rather than something written down in a corporate plan. So again, if we go back to Monday night, there was a time where even with a fire of that scale, we'd have been there maybe for 3 or 4 hours after, if you were lucky. We might have come back the next day to leaflet some blocks. What we wouldn't do is start to act as an advocate into other key services, because it's not our statutory role actually. We wouldn't have necessarily planned forward a set of public meetings to talk about the ongoing issues around safety and regulatory kind of responsibilities in relation to the block of flats. We wouldn't actually have maintained a continuous presence potentially for weeks after the incident, which is something we do regularly now with incidents of the most challenging kind of all sorts of kinds, whether it's tragic loss of life in Hounslow and Fulton Heath, Bexley Heath, Sutton, some of the terrible incidents we saw across the last year. That is a manifestly different approach, driven by the stuff we got back through consultation, what people wanted from lots of different bits of London, which is we were seen as great first responders. We've got the best attendance times in the world. We are the emergency service in London. If you call us, you're going to get us. We really have got a consistently amazing record on that. What Londoners told us was, okay, that's great, but we want you to stay after and help provide a degree of psychological and physical safety in terms of that extension of your statutory responsibilities. We heard that very clearly in all sorts of responses, and now we're trying to make it real. Still not entirely there yet. It's a growing function, but that's kind of the intent of CRMP, is to take response turn it into strategy, but then make it real for the people that Verona has responsibility for, educate them, and then get them out to make a practical difference on the streets.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Okay, just somebody more Polanski indicates is very quick.
Brief.
Very quick.
Thank you.
It's going to be record breaking, and then we're going to take a comfort break.
Commissioner, it's back on KPIs, and it's specifically on LGBT fire officer intakes. This isn't measured. Are there plans to measure, and if not, why? Sure. Fiona.
Yep, absolutely. I think it's a really good question. So, as you know, our current KPI lists lesbian, gay, bisexual staff rather than LGBTQ+. So we've been working, bear with me because there's a little bit of background that you need to understand for this one. So our inclusion team has been working on a new inclusion style guide which helps to answer common questions and to help make sure our communications are inclusive, respectful, etc. It's based on best practice for communicating with diverse audiences and to try and get our guidance to align across the GLA family and wider government as well. The reason why I'm saying that is because part of it is about a new agreed set of monitoring data categories, an option for employees to self-declare. The gender identity question has been expanded to provide more choice to the employee, and there'll now be a separate question relating trans status as well. We haven't implemented these changes yet. We're working out how we do that within our data team so that we can get it into our core systems and reports. As you can imagine, there's a little bit of work. But for us, it's really important that people feel that they are safe to self-declare and that they feel comfortable. And that's what all of our culture work is about as well, is to enable people to feel comfortable at work. For us, there's a tipping point in terms of numbers that can self-declare for different categories before you can really report it in a way that is useful and meaningful and without necessarily identifying individuals. So we're working through that at the moment with the hope that we will get to the point, the intention that we will get to the point where we can do that for next financial year, as in 25-26.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so we'll take a 5-minute comfort break. The time is 11:46. Let's come back see if we can do 11:51. Oh, sorry, gavel. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Just picking up where we left off, Andy, I heard you had some just a few further comments on LGBT intake.
No, it was just to recognise the specific nature of Assembly Member Polanski's question, which is about firefighter intake. So at the moment, we don't segregate that data down to firefighter intake. It's something we've got to look at and implement, I think. But there's a cultural question here, because actually the reality is, if you look at it statistically, if we just think about gay men, for example, or male colleagues who identify as gay, we can see that statistically we're out of kilter with society. That tells you you've got people who aren't comfortable to express themselves at work, that we're still not a workplace where people can be openly gay in that way. If you look at the numbers of people who self-declare, I think until we've created an environment where people are prepared to openly kind of state their sexuality and feel supported in that, I think it's going to be quite difficult. And we obviously gather that data at source, and it requires us to ask the question as well. So I think there's a cultural challenge there that we need to address. But I think it is a fair challenge in terms of segregating the data. So we look at overall staff composition, but I think the reporting of this is still quite low overall for all staff. So there's a cultural issue there, both in terms of the reporting and people's confidence to be themselves at work, which obviously we've had a lot of discussion around culture and how we kind of move that on in the workforce. But I think one of the manifestations of this will be when people are able to more openly and confidently state their kind of identity in that way, and we're just not there yet, really.
Thank you for that. Assembly Member Boff, and then I'm going to go back.
Just very briefly on clarification of that. I mean, from the figures that we've got, 10% of your staff declares as LGBTQ. So actually, you're not doing that bad, really, because that's 10% of Londoners are LGBTQ. So I didn't understand that statement.
No, I think that's a really, really fair point. I think it's because we know, really, from anecdotally, which is why we've got to segregate this better, is that staff are more confident in our headquarters environment to state their sexuality, their gender identity openly, whereas it's very clear to me, I visited 100 fire stations last year. We've got a number of firefighters who confidently express their sexuality, have prominent roles within our staff networks, but their reflection back to me is that in the operational environment, they find it quite unusual that we haven't got a much larger number of, for example, male firefighters who feel confident to openly state their sexuality and feel supported in that.
So it's not quantitative, it's qualitative.
It's a bit of both, because I think we just don't. I think honestly, Assembly Member Boff, we just haven't quite found a way to ask the question and give people the confidence to express themselves, and that's in the culture, and we need to do better.
So if I can add, I know you want to move on, Chair, but I know, Zach, you've been along to the Pride Breakfast, and I'm sure when you were there you met the co-chairs of the LGBTQ+ network. They're making a huge amount of progress. I'm really confident that they'd be very happy to talk to the committee members at some point about the sort of future challenges and the points that the Commissioner made reflect the conversations I've had with them as well about the challenges they see, particularly around encouraging male firefighters to come out as gay. And obviously some of them will have been on stations for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years and not actually feel comfortable to say, all the time I've been here, so I've been gay. So I think the challenges are quite specific to different areas of the organisation, but I know that the co-chairs would be happy to talk to Assembly members about it and would welcome the opportunity to talk about what they see is progressing, but also where they think there's further need for development.
Okay. I'm going to bring in Assembly Member Bakari, who's been waiting patiently about continuing engagement and consultation.
Thanks, Chair. So I'd like to talk about the community forums that are continuing that engagement and how we're reaching different communities. So Fiona, I know that you can tell me a little bit more about this, but also specifically about engagement with faith community organisations. And I'm not going to use, I hate this word. Can we please stop saying harder to reach groups? I think that's such a disgraceful term, because actually they're groups that are wanting to be engaged with. So how are you reaching with those particular groups in different parts of our community?
So if it's okay, Assembly Member Bakari, I'd like to answer that question, because really this sits at the heart of my desire to kind of change the London Fire Brigade. I'm a Londoner born and bred, and I've lived in lots of different bits of London. And I've had the benefit and challenge of you know, having a very large, what I would call very London family my whole life. And I want the benefit that family's given me, the breadth of experience, community, love, you know, but also experience of challenge to be felt at the heart of the London Fire Brigade, because I think it's what makes us different. I think firefighters are brilliant at this, where you set them free to do it and you overcome issues of confidence or, you know, prejudice and assumption that they, you know, and I know Gareth would echo this, they're just the kindest people in the world and they want to do it. You know, you just have to get them there sometimes. So that's really, in layperson's terms, what we're talking about with community engagement. It's getting out there to be with Londoners. And this place is amazing, isn't it? So I don't like hard to reach either. I think it's about the effort you make, isn't it? I don't think they're hard to reach. You've got to make the effort. I think it's better to explain it as these are people we don't always listen to very carefully, that institutions of all kinds sometimes treat with disrespect and don't entirely value for the contribution they make to both our economy in London and sense of community and difference and pride in this city, which is so often a place of opportunity for people of all kinds. How are we doing it? Well, by being just very, very focused at a local level. So, you know, Verona perhaps can speak to this. One of Verona's jobs in terms of constructing a borough risk management plan is to tell us, the organisation, explicitly who's in your borough. You know, it's not just about communities, it's about risk profiles, it's about age, it's about sexuality, it's about who makes up the population of your borough and what risk resides within that, and then more importantly, what you're going to do about it. Have you spoken to them? How do you intend to get there? How do you encourage them to come onto our estate? And how do we get our firefighters out into their spaces to really understand what we can do to support them? It's that straightforward. And you can write it down, can't you? Because if I go to Southwark, it's a different, you know, a conglomerate of communities from perhaps if I go out to Ruislip in West London. And therefore I expect a different answer in every borough. And rather than nice words about how we're going to engage, I want to see some concrete action, i.e., how many times do you go and meet these people? What did you learn? You know, this is your qualitative piece that other colleagues on the Assembly have raised, which is what did you actually do and what difference did it make? So obviously we've got some good examples of where I think we're getting it right. So if I think about Tower Hamlets and Newham, where we got firefighters to really enjoy the experience actually and see the value they're giving by getting into a number of different faith communities, particularly the Muslim Bengali community in Tower Hamlets and Pakistani and South Asian communities out in Newham. You know, if I think about the work in a completely different context out in Kingston with the kind of riparian transient community who live on houseboats, who carry a number of risks. You know, the borough commander down there, Rob Davies, done a brilliant job. You know, super focused on that, and he can tell me how many people he's seen and what he's done. That's to his credit. That's the power of a borough risk management plan. That's the intent. So the strategy is set by good people like Donna Peters at the strategic level, which is you inform your practice from the people you're serving, which is the people of London. Here are some tips and tools for how you might go about engaging in a different way. It's not just leafleting or, you know, a school fete. All of those things are important, but actually something a bit more kind of targeted and prepared to have difficult conversations about what we might not be providing and the challenges that people face. So I think it's about that intent then delivered in reality on the ground, like almost everything else in the CRMP, and we collect a lot of data about it, so we can point to what we're doing and where we're doing it. Do I think we're there yet? No, because I think it's a whole-scale change to the way we approach engagement and how we see ourselves in London. Am I confident we'll get there? Yes, because I think out of all the services, the London Fire Brigade, in the sort of people it employs, is best placed to do it.
I want to get a clearer picture of, I mean, it sounds like you've got different approaches depending on the boroughs and the area, and that makes sense. But I want to get a clearer picture of how they work. You know, does that mean then, because of the difference in terms of the areas that you represent, there may be a different approach in terms of how often they meet and who meet and how they're and just the diversity within those groups. So I just want to get a clearer picture of that. So Fiona, do you have a clear breakdown on how those forums are working throughout London?
That's not something that I've got to hand today, but we can certainly provide an update for you. It might be worth Verona talking through what happens in Southwark.
Yeah, I'd like to know what happens in Southwark, but it would be really useful for me, and I'm sure the committee, to get a wider London picture of how everything is working.
Yep.
I'd like to know in terms of attendance at meetings, how often they happen. I want to know how they're publicised. I went and looked through the London Fire Brigade website on how it was pitched there. It was a lovely video of you, Andy, on there.
I do occasionally produce one.
But I have to say, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm a little bit disappointed in the way it was projected on the website. It wasn't engaging me. It didn't make me excited. It didn't make me think, oh, yeah, I want to get involved with this. What can we do better?
Well, OK, that's a fair challenge. We'll take that one away, because that's about our digital strategy at a corporate level, isn't it? And how we communicate to all of London to welcome them in, as it were. The answer really is I expect it to be delivered down that end, because I've been out, you know, as a firefighter in inner London fire stations. I've been an operational officer my entire career. I spend an enormous amount of time now with the community, frequently with the people who are most significantly traumatised by some of the worst events we see in London. So I know the power of sitting face to face, and I know that requires significant personal effort, not a website. And I do expect it to be driven at a local level through community safety forums, through targeted effort set against that operational risk assessment underpins a borough risk management plan, the demographics of your borough. So I expect an answer within the plan, and then I expect people to be held against the delivery of their local plan. And actually where we're going in 24-25 is the station plan needs to speak to that as well. So I expect watch officers to own this. That my expectation is Verona leaves watch officers to say, who do we most need to see in the community? Do we think we know who's in the community? Where can we go and ask? Because we don't hold all the information necessarily. And I think, whilst we don't have all the data, because this is new practice, we can certainly provide you with a summary of what we're doing across London. Because, for example, the Community Engagement Unit, which is that strategic unit, alongside practitioners who turn out on the worst incidents, are collecting that data. And we can give you a kind of summary across the boroughs of where we're at. And
you're confident that every single borough has had a community forum that has happened and it's happening regularly, that you can...
I wouldn't say it's a community forum in the same context in every single borough, because you're going to work through different mechanisms depending on the local authority and what seat you've already got. But I absolutely expect engagement in different ways with the community that is tangible and measurable, we can report back on. Where a community forum is appropriate within a borough in that way, with the right sort of attendance, yes, I do. And we'll come back to you in terms of what's up and operating. I mean, genuinely, it's not an opportunity to deflect, but I'm interested how Verona does do it in Southwark.
I'm going to make sure, I'm definitely coming to you, Verona, but I just want to make sure that we're clear on what a community forum is, what it does, and how we measure it, and how we, make sure that it's a success. Because I think there's still some vagueness here. That's my concern here.
I don't think there is. So I think at a strategic level, it's really clear. I've sat on the strategic community forum, which includes Grenfell survivors, survivors of the New Cross fire, relatives of Londoners who've lost their lives due to EV fires, disability campaign group leads, local residents across every quarter of London within our command area, people with specific interests in high-rise and transport. So I'm expecting that to be mirrored, where appropriate, down through the boroughs. What I can't give you immediately is the numbers across those boroughs, because I don't have them to hand.
Okay.
And they will take, what I will say is they will take a different mechanism in different places, because where stuff already exists, where there's amalgamations of kind of community interest within a structure, within a local authority, we may well choose to address it in that way. So there has to be some flexibility for the borough commander to decide how they're going to bring members of the community together. And what is appropriate in terms of diversity. Because I can tell you now from our own strategic community forum, it's an amazing bit of work by Donna Peters, but a spread of interests, backgrounds, and kind of rightfully agendas within that group of people means it is quite a skilled thing to manage in terms of that. So I need to give borough commanders the opportunity as well to segment interaction, because truthfully, it may not be appropriate to put an elderly interest group in with someone who's really interested in violence reduction, because we've got a violence reduction duty. So
I can completely understand.
But I think your question is excellent, and what we should do is demonstrate that we're taking the strategy and delivering it coherently in a planned way, in a measurable way through the boroughs. And that, I think that's what our reply needs to give you.
Well, we've heard so much already. So can you tell us a little bit about the community forum in Southwark and how it works?
So to be really honest, we don't have a specific community forum. So the way that we engage within our borough is a lot of it is through direct contact. So, we do a lot of things like estate days, especially with the violence reduction bits around knife crime and VOG, so violence against women and girls. This is listening directly to what the community want, and actually through forums of those senses is where we are then able to impart knowledge and discuss further wider experiences and desires for the fire service. So, as and when I hold meetings and we get people in, I'm not literally counting who's walking through the door to come and sit and have a chat with me or my firefighters. It is that qualitative bit, and that really understanding what it is that people want. The community safety partnership and the work that goes on with the council and the voluntary sector, especially within Southwark, is absolutely huge. The the direct impact on fire safety and what residents want. It's around about 80% social landlords and council-owned within Southwark. The desires and demands of the community in respect of that are really different and really specific, and each estate has a very different desire and want from the fire service as well. So we need to be able to adapt to that and be very respectful of what people want, and that's where the forums in that sense are quite fluid. It's also recognising that the way that and the demographic of my borough, people are shift workers. So, trying to find everyone at the same time is near on impossible, and that's respecting that a lot of the residents in my borough work 2-3 jobs, and actually it's trying to reach out to them in different ways to be able to get that response back, and, making ourselves available at weekends, later in the evenings, first thing in the morning. That type of thing is how we get our response back, because set forums don't really work, and that is just the demographic and the workings of my borough. Absolutely, we are there, and they can go and knock on any one of my fire stations 24/7, and someone will answer the door to them to discuss whatever it is they want. But it's being able to have that access and that fluidity.
Well, I'm definitely coming to visit, as I've already said to you that I am. And what I really would love to know in those conversations that I'm going to be having with you and your firefighters is to make sure that there aren't any missing voices. And that's what I'm concerned about I get the need for fluidity and making sure that you're fitting each of your boroughs. But how do we make sure that no one's voice is missing? So, can you guarantee me that, for example, disabled Londoners within Southwark are being heard? Have they got their voices heard within your borough?
So in terms of that, that's where if I find a group that's difficult to reach, to get to, the voluntary sector that runs through Southwark Council is really imperative and works really well. So I'm able to go to the director and say, who is this person? Who can I speak to? How do I get to them? And that's where I'm relying on them in that way. Is that the best way? Is that ideal? No, absolutely. We need to reach a range of people in so many different formats, and I think we're still learning, we're still developing, and by all means, Southwark Borough is not the best run, and there's always room to improve. An example that I'm working on now is the Multi-Faith Forum. It closed down for a while, it's now back up and running, and actually I'm trying to get back into that and further involved with that. But that does take time, that takes trust, that takes being able to be accepted to go into there, to understand what they want from me, what I can give to them, etc. And it's a work in progress, and I think as long as we're honest with each other, that it is working, it's not the finished article.
Thank you for your honesty, because I think what you've just highlighted there, it's not easy. The fact that you're talking to your local council and councillors, very key. I've said this to Fiona myself, that the need for that community engagement has to come from that perspective as well, because I'm going to reiterate again, missing voices, that's what my concern is. I know that the Commissioner and Deputy Mayor...
Can I just come back on that specific point, if it's all right? So I think it's a really good question. I've got to be careful, because we're back in the realms of, I hold the leverage in the organisation to mandate something. So I could say, by then, every borough has got a separate community forum. We have discussed this. I need to give some space for people to get there. I think ultimately I would like to see that. I would like to see an LFB-owned entity within each borough. To get to that point, though, with meaning, I've got to give people space and time, both to develop the practice to meaningfully populate it. So that means relationships. So we've only strategically got to the community forum space, the London Fire Brigade one, the one that I go and speak into, that Donna chairs. Michael chairs, but Donna kind of curates. So Michael Williams, who is obviously an external chair, is a Brixton resident whose mother tragically died in a fire. It's taken us a long time to get there, because I'll be frank, I could place that mandate on Verona and all the other borough commanders. We're quite a task-focused organisation. They would go and find me 15 Southwark residents to sit on a community forum. But your point is that it needs to be the right people with the right voice. And I think if I set just a deadline by then, so the aspiration is clearly there in CRMP. We want it done, but I need it done correctly, because we did a pilot across 9 boroughs. What that told us was that the concept of a community forum is right, actually getting the right people on it, persuading them that the fire brigade is of any interest to them, actually, when you've got issues such as housing and policing that really, really, if I'm brutally honest, impact people in a different way more frequently. Actually getting people in with a meaning, we've both got to demonstrate our value, and we've got to create a space that encourages them to come in. So I think it's one of those things that sits as an action, but is actually, particularly in the context of the fire service, where we still historically see mainly as a force for response, it is quite tricky. I expect to keep on coming back to this committee to be asked how we're doing, and we will need to demonstrate in its complexity what we are doing. What is non-negotiable for me, and Verona knows this because I've stood in front of that borough commander group enough times, is kind of tokenistic activity that doesn't speak to the risk within your borough, not acceptable. You will need to demonstrate to me the level of contact you have had and the outcomes that has given us for me to consider you actually performing. So in Verona's defence, we did invite Verona here today because we wanted someone who I think runs a good borough, and she is out there the whole time. I'm not someone who particularly wants to put someone in front of this committee who I don't think is performing out in her borough. She is out there the whole time. So I know there is a volume of activity, sometimes in very challenging spaces, with one of the most deprived boroughs in London. And actually, what I like is hearing in Verona's own language the fact that she knows we've got people who are really struggling with poverty, in ordinary working people in Southwark who have got 2 or 3 jobs. She knows that every estate in Southwark, and that has some of the highest densities of social housing in London, is different in its character, in its history, in its population, and therefore has to be, has different relationship with us as a service, because we'll even have a different history dependent on the incidents in there. So I think your question is entirely correct.
I just wanted to add, some time ago now, before I was elected to the Assembly, I worked for a major charity and I led on user involvement. one of the first things I learnt in that role was that you can set up a meeting, you can have meetings, you get people who like going to meetings, who want to join things, but actually that legwork in terms of going round and talking to people where they are rather than expecting them to come to you, which is the sort of traditional model of a forum, it means that you're less likely to miss people's voices. So I think that when I was listening to Verona, I was hugely impressed by the amount of work that must go into the type of activity she was describing at all times of day, all times of the week, to make sure that voices weren't missed. And I think that this is part of the transformation of the Fire Brigade and moving away from a tick box exercise. I've met people on the sort of London level community forum. I think it's a really impressive piece of work. Do we need that in the same form at every single level within London? Probably not, because there are existing ways to get into people, there are existing forums, and every different borough is different. So I think that it would be much easier to tell borough commanders that they've got to have a monthly meeting with members of the community, who would then almost inevitably be self-appointed community representatives, and definitely you would then miss out on some of the voices of the people who don't have time or energy or scope to come along and have their voices heard. But if you go to them and you ask them on their terms what they need and whether the Fire Brigade is being responsive, then yes, they will engage on their terms in their space. And I think that's the difference between saying a community is hard to reach because they don't come to a meeting that doesn't work for them, versus real community engagement, which is what I think, with a huge amount of effort and investment, we are now starting to see in the Fire Brigade. And I'm going to make Verona blush again, because I think she's doing a cracking job and she really does understand the community.
I think it is a really, really good question, and what I will take away is that, because I think you're right to say, actually, and provide a challenge, is this impression of vagueness. I don't think it's vague, I think it's complicated. So I think we need to give an explanation that isn't just a headline, but speaks to the fact that actually, if I want a fully successful community forum in every borough, because it's appropriate, I bet you in some places I'll have to do 2 or 3 years of relationship building before I get people who actually want to sit on it, who have a meaning. And we probably need to talk to the progress we're making in that journey, as much as just saying this is an aspiration. So there's something for me about we clearly haven't kind of given you full confidence that it's something other than a strapline, whereas I know there's an enormous amount of activity occurring in every borough, and people have been challenged by it. People have found it difficult. I mean, I think the Borough Commander cohort have found it really difficult at times, because we've always prided ourselves of being of the community, community safety experts. To be told that actually we might not have engaged with the community as well as we could, and that was the feedback that came through both the inquiry and also our own consultation. Actually, it's been quite hard for the pride of people. So we've almost had to learn a set of skills in a different context. So I think we need to write to you. We'll give you some metrics and answers in terms of the detail of what we've done, and a better characterisation.
That's the best way to scrutinise you, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, I did actually go into Assembly Member Polanski's questions because of the way you were answering the questions. It's fantastic. But I want to wrap it up in terms of, you've mentioned Donna many times. I want to say it on record, she is an amazing member of your team. She's doing fantastic work. I was very honoured to be invited by her to one of your events, which was the Muslim Women's event at East London Mosque. Want to know, just very quickly, are you going to have any more? And if you have, why haven't you invited me? There you go.
Well, I think we will, but again, that's down to the Borough Commander, really, with Donna's support. What I really need to do, so I think Donna's amazing. I think she is someone who's come with a professional skill set that we probably didn't have. I think at times she's found it challenging making progress inside the London Fire Brigade, because it's a different approach to how we do this. What I need to do is take that expertise and franchise it, and that is also part of the challenge. It can't just be Donna, can it, really? It's got to be kind of an instinct and a skill set that becomes part of the professional armoury.
I love
colleagues
that
like Verona.
idea of taking her skills and franchising it. This is exactly what we need to do throughout. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Gareth, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much. Assembly Member Clarke, a couple of bits I can't resist because you've opened something up, so just bear with me on this one. This is my opportunity really to talk about more about where we are as London as a whole. I mean, firstly, before we go anywhere, I mean, the hard to reach or harder to reach members of the community, I completely agree. And I wrote down there, I said, look, it's either corporately or individually, surreptitiously or unconsciously, excusing your inability or lack of desire to connect or communicate. Because that's what it is, let's be honest. Oh, they're hard to reach, so let's pop that over there. So, yeah, I agree with you. But that got me into thinking there about the part that's really relevant, and that is around what we don't actually see with our colleagues in the country, or across the country, sorry, isolated pockets granted in cities, but mainly they live and work and breathe in those communities. And so they're a member of the community. And for a long, long time, there's been a strive through recruitment to say that the fire service is wanting to reflect the communities it serves. It's very difficult sometimes in this city with the cost of living crisis, the stagnation of firefighters' wages and bits and pieces, all of those things that we can come into. And I think it makes it quite difficult sometimes. I think the Metropolitan Police were looked at in the 80s where it was said that they would come in and behind the doors and they would use it as a forward operating post. And we've had all these conversations within the FBU as well. But when our members live within the community, you see an absolute difference because it means something to them. You know, I've lived both in and out of London and worked in and out of London. And outside of London, I had local councillors knocking my door, coming to raise issues that they'd seen when I was literally as a firefighter rank. And that was fascinating and really welcoming because you were held in great esteem. And also the other problem is that we've had such scrutiny that there's a fear sometimes of our members now. They've gone, oh, everyone's, you know, we're really good and now everyone's really getting at us and I'm really fearful of sticking myself out there, what's going to happen to me? Which is a shame, and I'm sure it's completely, well, it's not insurmountable and it's completely navigatable, but it is a reality. And so I think for us, we need to look at the way that we get affordable housing for our key workers and personnel. It's not just the fire service, it's across the piece, how we embed those people within the community, how they can become the community voices. Because when we talk about hard to reach groups, we're not going to do hard to reach anymore, apologies, but I'm just doing it for the purpose of this. Why are they hard to reach? You know, why is this not a career that's particularly attractive to them? What is that? And that's a huge point for debate and one which is, you know, far greater than the time we've got here today. But I think it would have been a missed opportunity to not highlight that piece because we're talking it from a very strategic level, delivering a service to London and Londoners, of course. But our workforce to reflect London and Londoners by being London and Londoners is ultimately the 100% place where we need to go. And that includes people moving into London to bring up a career within the city.
Thank you so much for that contribution. Assemblymember Polanski.
Thank you. I'm not sure if Assemblymember Buckhara stood on some of my questions as much as drove a bulldozer right through them, but that's okay. It was still a really important conversation. I'm glad it happened. I just want to pick up on a couple of things. First of all, I just want to amplify everything Gareth said. I just think that's so important. And also there's this whole conversation about money for funding. Not a conversation we can have here, but it'll be interesting if there's a change of government and actually we could tax wealth and then there would be more money for everyone and everything if we tax multimillionaires and billionaires. But I'm not going to ask you guys about that, don't worry. Commissioner, emerging risks like climate change, how important is this continuing engagement in light of new and emerging risks?
So it's baked into the process of review of CRMP. So we do an annual assessment of risk, and that assessment of risk is probably the most singularly important part of the CRMP process, because unless you understand what you're delivering against, how can you decide whether your service is fit for purpose and meeting its legal mandate? So kind of the reassurance I would provide to this committee is that we are transparent in how we get to that point. You know, it is an evidence-driven approach that looks at everything from population to the statistics of what is occurring in the capital, looks at emerging risk in terms of what we're seeing, not just in London, but in other environments, and then considers the impact that might have on our service. So it's a kind of mature approach that then drives what we think our operating model will be. Is it important? It's absolutely fundamental to us keeping Londoners safe. So we know that we have increasing risk in the built environment, not decreasing. So, for example, our operational assessment of risk tells us, and this is one of the factors that informs it, that we have a problem with construction skills and the way we construct and competently inspect buildings in the UK. It's obvious, isn't it? It's there from the Grenfell inquiry, but it is obvious in our day-to-day interaction with that environment. Therefore, we know that we have to prepare for buildings that are increasingly large, increasingly high-rise and increasingly complex, but potentially not operating in the right way, and therefore we must have an operational response to deal with that. We know that London will soon be Europe's most high-rise city. We know that we have an increasing number of residential blocks that stretch beyond 50 floors, and that they are mixed use. So they might hold, like the Shard does, a hospital, a restaurant, offices, and homes within it. And it might, as the Shard does, for example, as an example, sit on one of the busiest rail interchanges in Europe. That is the detail of the operational risk assessment that then drives our business. And it looks forward as well as back. And if we talk about climate, it is very, very clear to me, and I've been involved operationally in this for many years as a national flood rescue advisor, as an operational planner, heading up our technical rescue. It's very obvious to me that we've gone from a place where you were having 1 in 100, as they called it, or 1 in 200 year events, to now having year-on-year events related to extreme weather of different kinds. Now, I'm not a scientist to be able to explain fully the underpinning the underpinning science that gives us that. All I can tell you is that it's very obvious to me that our service is going to have to adapt and deliver against that, because it is a factual and data-driven reality that we can state within our operational assessment of risk.
Thank you. And secondly, so a very repetitive conversation I have with the mayor is around meaningful engagement, and I'd say 3 criteria for me about what meaningful engagement looks like, but I'm open to other criteria. That's part of the engagement process, is that people set the agenda, they can see when they've engaged with it that something has changed, and crucially, they're paid for their time and effort. Now, the Violence Reduction Unit and the Housing Panel, I think, are 2 good models where people are paid for their time and effort. I hear what you're saying, that people are less likely to necessarily want to engage with the fire brigade unless they've had, sadly, direct experience of it. Is paying some people for their time and effort something you would consider in order to reach some of these groups who might have 2 or 3 jobs and would be more attracted to the idea of getting paid for their time?
Yes, is the short answer. I don't think we've got to that point at a local level, because I think we're starting really with a different approach and a different practice. But yes, and the reason I say that is because we're starting to address that question in some of the more strategic forums where we're with community, because I recognise that people are giving us their time, and quite a lot of their time, and we need to reflect that. So that's a live question and debate. Obviously, it's got to be balanced against resourcing what's appropriate, ensuring that people maintain a degree of independence in that, because you do get a question back about, well, if you're paying kind of Londoners to come and do this, are you just getting what you want? So I think there is, but I think it's a fair question, and actually I'm of the personal opinion that where community members have volunteered to give their time and their insight, sometimes because of personal tragedy, we should recognise the expertise that brings, because expertise comes in all forms, doesn't it? So I'm of a mind that we probably should do, and there is work underway at the moment to look at that in some of the different spaces. We bring community members in to provide us advice and challenge.
It's really promising to hear. I don't know if you wanted to come in, Deputy Mayor.
Only to reflect on the point that the Commissioner made about making sure that we don't diminish people's voices if they feel that they've got a contractual arrangement that might be broken if they're critical. I don't think that would happen, but I think we'd need to work through all the risks associated with that to make sure that we're absolutely confident it doesn't happen. All I can say is that having met a number of people who are engaged in the different bits of the structures around engagement, it does now feel more like engagement than consultation. They are clearly feeling heard, but they'll only feel heard as long as the changes that they discuss they'll only feel heard if things change as a result of what they say. And I think ultimately, for a lot of people who've gone through incredible trauma as a result of a fire, whatever type of fire or flooding or other incident it is, it's ultimately they are getting involved because they want to see change, and it's about what happens as a result that is key, I think, in terms of their motivation. But absolutely, should we consider sort of other ways of recognition? Yes, but I think it needs to be worked through very, very carefully to make sure we don't dampen their voice.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I'm really glad those conversations are happening. Gareth?
Yeah, just again, another side point is one thing that I've discovered with engagement at the moment is that everyone's really quite tired out there in society post-pandemic. There's some real questions around politics and what that looks like for your average person on the street engaging with that. And so therefore, and on top of that as well, there's this huge amount of information bombarded at us every day, and it's very hard to prioritise that as a member of public to understand what's important and what isn't. Everything seems to be of equal importance these days, and I think that's something that as a trade union we're not bad. Our members are there, but for us to get forward our message is sometimes really, really, really complicated and really difficult. For an organisation such as Fire and Rescue Service, who still, to the greater degree in the public eye, in my finding, it's only my finding, but in my finding it's, well, if I ring for a fire engine, one turns up, that's all I care about, makes that quite hard to get into that engagement space as well. So when we need to do a national campaign around smoke alarms, for example, or a national campaign around a pandemic, it's done, and it really brings it up into the forefront of people's minds. But, as we are in a city like this, a global city, there's a lot of politicking going on. It's very hard for people to become connected. And, ultimately, I haven't got an answer to that. Maybe we could look forward to, as we do in magistrates, community champions. I don't know. That's a bigger picture and something more to look at. But, it's been a very hard thing to navigate for everybody this side of the table, as I know it will have been for you as well.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I think it would be wrong to come and sit in front of this committee today and not reflect on my experiences in testimony week last week. And I know for some members of the Grenfell community, they don't feel it had a value, and they're completely entitled to feel that because they are the one who suffered the tragedy. But for the bereaved and survivors that were there, I hope it did have a value. But what it was a sharp reminder to me is, despite having been in this landscape, well, from the moment I took over the incident and nearly 7 years on, there's not a day that I'm not in that space. There were still people who came to testimony week I had not spoken to. I knew their names because I know in memory the names of the 72 who passed. But it was another sharp reminder to me that you can't ever do enough in this space, because you didn't have the opportunity to respond rightly within testimony week. You sat there as a defendant listening to the personal stories of loss and tragedy that awful incident manifest. But I could have screamed inside because I know I've got answers to some of the questions they were posing, and that's in the context of having done so much communication, so much engagement, having sat in rooms with other bereaved, other survivors. You just know you haven't quite got there. I heard terribly traumatised individuals, Londoners, with utter dignity, explaining how they didn't think we changed. If I said that to a firefighter, an officer on the ground, who I literally have pulled through the last kind of 4.5 years as their commissioner, bombarded with change. When I think about a fire that happens on Monday night, where we literally do the opposite of what happens at Grenfell, I know we've changed as an organisation. We're not perfect. We're not always getting it right. We don't always hear people, but my God, the level of change has been, significant, hard won, and I think we're fairly honest as an organisation as well to sit there and think we've done all of that. We've tried to communicate, we've tried to engage, and still we have not made ourselves understood to you. That's our failure, not theirs. So I know we have to go further. I know that it's not enough to write a letter to those colleagues. They need to have an invite that they genuinely want to accept to come in and judge me on the evidence. And Lord knows I'll be subject to whatever they think. But So for me, the engagement piece can never be disconnected from my experiences then, nor all the other smaller and larger tragedies I've had kind of the both privilege and sadness of attending in my career. But I can promise you now there is an absolute urgency within the London Fire Brigade, because what we have experienced over the past few years and the damage we know that has been done inside that community particularly, to just try and get there. But we're still not there. Last week was proof of it to me. We're still not there. And actually, if any of those courageous Londoners who were there last week are watching this and hearing this, you have a personal invite from me as Commissioner to come and sit in a room with me. You can ask me any question you want, from stay put, to how we've changed the way we operate on the ground, to how we pay for it. I don't care. There is no question off limits, because we owe that to you. So if you are hearing that, this is my invite to you. I will write to you and I will emphasise that. But I have the greatest of respect for your dignity. And whilst I could not answer last week, and I know there was doubts in many of your minds whether the corporate respondents had either heard you nor had the humanity to feel inside, I can tell you now there is not a night or a day that I have not thought of Grenfell. And I can tell you were very much heard, and I would welcome the opportunity to sit in a room and talk to you and answer those questions, just as I welcome the opportunity to speak to this committee.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think there's a real balance on this committee between scrutinising you and the Fire Brigade, as we rightly do, but also recognising the leadership that you show and the leadership you're showing when you're saying I'm willing to have that conversation, as I believe you should, but not a lot of leaders would do that, and I just want to recognise that you do that, and thank you. It's difficult to follow that, to jump on to more mundane things, but Fiona, could I ask you about the training to provide fire station staff around sorry, I've been thrown around borough risk management plans. Training for fire station staff around borough risk management plans. Thank you.
Okay, I can probably start. Verona's probably closer to it as well. So we have a dedicated borough commander, a man called Clarke, who is leading across all of the boroughs on making sure that everybody knows what they need to do. The station plans are really simple. They are a plan on a page. They have the key. They will have the key information about what is important in your station grounds, so your local environment, as Andy's described around the borough management plans as well. And they will also then have very focused targets and kind of things that people need to do within that year. So the engagement is happening locally, it's happening through the borough commanders. Any training that people need to help them to understand it will be through conversation, and it will be through practically applying learning through actually developing the plan.
Verona, sorry, I don't know if you want to come in there. Thank you.
Part of the training plan that we have, each borough, so every single watch has a borough training day. So actually part of that is to go through the updates with the BRMP. So all borough commanders are present, as the station commanders, and we bring all the watches together. So you'll get all three stations together. In my example, it's usually at Old Kent Road, and we'll spend the day together. We'll go through updated training, and it changes. So as new risks come in, I will adapt it. I will sit down with them. I will go through updates, go through incidents of notes, go through any feedback from any of the community engagement events we might have had, and that's the time where we can really tailor it to the needs of the community as it's changed, or again vice versa. I recognise that I don't attend as many incidents as they do. They've actually got a wealth of knowledge to impart to me, so at that point they can say to me, we attended this has happened, we've found it really hard to get responses off of this partnership, etc. And actually that's where I can step in and I can make those, use the links, use the relationships that I have to make change within the borough. So that training does come through the borough training days, but also I think it's really appropriate that we recognise this is the first year. If you look at my borough training, my borough risk management plan that I completed last year versus what's going to come out of it, there's going to be some real fundamental changes, because actually we went into it, and being a bit honest, we didn't have the best training to put it in there, but actually we've had nearly a year now to constantly make changes, and as risks change, I will. The way that I do things, I have a copy on my desk and I will come in and I will write down, and I've adapted it, and what's going to come out this year for my borough is completely different from last year, and that's why it's it's evolving, and it's really good that I've got that capacity to be able to do that, because the risks that are in last year's plan a lot of it has changed, because actually what the community want from us is different. It's not just fires, it is real community engagement, it's being seen, it's, you know, being there, being a safety net in all manners of things, not just fires, not just special services, etc. And, you know, that's where that training and that, you know, that imparting knowledge and vice versa with my firefighters, with my watch officers, is really important, because they have a wealth of knowledge that actually they need to impart with me. They see and talk to members of the community every day. I've got 3 very, very busy stations. You know, there's not a day that they're not out there. Minimum 5 times a day, 6 times plus overnight. You know, they are out there 24/7 engaging with the community in their worst moments. And actually, when we're responding to people in their worst moments, they're brutally honest with us, and that I welcome that, and that helps me change and adapt to the risks.
And it sounds like it should be iterative, otherwise it's a best laid plan until it comes in conflict with reality. So thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Assemblymember Boff.
Ms Dolman, what learning has come from the borough commanders in drawing up their borough risk management plans?
I think that's a really fair question. You probably heard some of that from Verona in what she's just said. So we recognise that at the beginning of this process, when we first put together the kind of the format and the template for the borough risk management plans, we hadn't done it before. There are very few places that have actually done it, and so we recognised that whilst we were working through that, we were getting feedback about what worked and what didn't work. Borough commanders' capacity to deliver on the borough risk management plan and what we needed to do to support them. So the learning has been about how we develop the plan, how we give the borough commanders the kind of the autonomy to be able to develop their plans, and how we help them to understand that strategic context as well, so they can take what we said at a CRMP level and say, what does this mean for me locally, and how do I work that through? For me, that's probably the key. Do they talk to each other? Yeah, absolutely.
So borough commanders will
absolutely. They have regular borough commander days.
Can I just ask, perhaps a bit of a tangent, to Borough Commander Clarke? When you're asked for your view of planning applications in Southwark, what resources do you commit to this, and how do you pay for it?
So in that sense, they refer to our fire safety team and the councils, because actually it's not appropriate for firefighters to consult, or even myself. We're not the subject matter experts in terms of the real finite details of that. They are referred, so in that sense that's not something that we
it's not a direct responsibility of yours. There's
no,
an automatic reporting.
There's a separate department that will deal with that.
Thank you very much.
That's right, I'm very glad you gave that answer. if you'd given someone else, if you'd given another answer, if you'd ad-libbed on that, I would have been very sad. So absolutely not within Verona's statutory responsibilities in respect to that part of our statutory duties. Obviously, she's got a great responsibility in terms of safety in the built environment, informal consultation and advice. It's got to be delivered through area fire safety teams, and we have dedicated officers for each borough. They might cover more than one borough, and it's within those teams, and we flex those teams based on risk, because the risk in one place, I'll give you an example, Westminster. So Westminster is one of the most crowded environments in the world, never mind the UK. It's got 600 plus high rises, that's 100 more than Manchester. We have to throw more fire safety and planning resources at that, and it's a mixture of both central and area teams, because we frequently find in the more complex environments that we need to put a fire engineer into it. That's a central team. So that is run through our fire safety department. It's led by an assistant commissioner. They are constantly looking at the performance markers across London.
I get that. Can you put your hand on your heart and you say that they're resourced enough?
What, in terms of fire safety?
Yeah.
In terms of money, yes.
Those fire safety teams.
In terms of people, no, because it goes back to that high risk audit KPI. Because we are struggling to recruit the people to do the work, because the work you're talking about, which is detailed statutory consultation on planning matters, sometimes a very high level of technical expertise in the context of building construction.
So this is a staffing shortage.
Yes.
There's not the people out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So they're very challenged in that space.
So can the public be sure that when the fire service have no objection to a planning application, that development can be considered safe?
Okay, there's a number of layers to the answer to this question. In respect to fire safety, if they've done their job properly, yes. In the context of wider building safety, when I'm sitting in an environment and you think about the range of response we deliver, if I think about everything from panel construction to rack to modular construction, where we've seen very serious structural failings, we don't speak to that. In terms of specifically fire safety...
Fire safety,
the
absolutely.
Answer would
I'm
be,
not expecting you to comment
yes,
on the general architecture of a building.
No,
fire safety.
I wasn't trying to be facetious, because to be fair, I think sometimes people do think that we're going to comment on the other aspects. We actually have a regulatory role to comment specifically on the impact of any construction methodology or plan design on fire safety. Do we always get the risk right? No, because we are a big organisation looking at thousands of applications over the course of time. So it would just be wrong, because, without being disrespectful, I would expect someone to come back with an example where we haven't. So do I think in the vast majority of cases we get this right? Yes, I do. My assurance to you is where I've seen us get it wrong, we very quickly move formally in the regulatory space to address it. And I can think of examples where we've had to come back around an original decision, because again we have layers of assurance within that department, particularly that department. So we are looking at the quality of our audit, inspection and advice continuously, not just the volume but what we're actually putting into it, because I know that in the volume of what we have to provide advice on, the complexity of some of it, you sometimes need a second look, and we sometimes need to acknowledge if you
have quite a lot of pressure. So it's fine. I'm getting somewhere with this. You have a lot of pressure on those fire safety teams. Do you think there's a situation where they're just passing applications because they're too busy to do so?
Absolutely not. No. And I'll say that with utter confidence. I think to be fair I think it's actually a fair question, because obviously we have seen that in other parts of the regulatory regime. If I think about, one of my criticisms of the planning regime in this country, the reason why we need a building safety regulator is because I think we have fallen well short of what competent inspection looks like in the planning process across most of the built environment. And I'm not just saying it because it's my organisation, because I hope the committee would acknowledge that I frequently come here and explain where I don't think we're meeting the challenge of what we're meant to deliver. I definitely do not think that is the case. And actually, I'm afraid the reason I think that is not one that fills me with happiness. It's because every single person in that fire safety department can turn to Grenfell, can turn to what I had to articulate into that inquiry around, at that point, our inability to carry out an operational plan.
That's the assurance I need. I know of a particular case quite close to me where in the past the fire inspection had been done on a building and then it burnt, and it was clear to me that had been rushed. Now, if you're learning lessons, I
actually know
this. Twycross will know which I'm talking
about.
In
Riverside, I know the incident.
Yes, you do.
So I do not think,
and that had been passed by the fire safety unit as safe.
I think that was in a different era where we understood risk differently,
and we've learnt from that.
Yeah,
that's
everything
what I wanted
from wooden
to establish.
balconies to cladding to methods of construction. I think it's a fair point in that context, because you had that local challenge. So I think I run a completely different organisation in the context of how they view risk.
You can have trust in those fire reports that appear on planning applications.
I can, because we apply great pressure internally onto those staff. They know that they're not under pressure from planners or developers. That's not where my interests lie. They work for me. My interest lies in the safety of people in the community, and I communicate that as clearly through my hierarchy as I am into this committee. I think it's a fair question, because in the past we have not always held ourselves true to an understanding of risk in London.
I'm just very, very, very aware of time, and Andrew Buff has used a lot of time today. But coming on to the final questions are from Assemblymember Schick.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll try and limit it to 5 minutes because I know we are against the clock. And I actually concede I do think that line of questioning was helpful, Andrew. I think Assemblymember Buff, I think I get sometimes a bit frustrated that the context of, to be honest, and it is funding, building safety units or the statutory duty on the fire brigade to respond to applications is desperately underfunded, just like 12, 13 years of austerity has carved out planning departments and local councils. And I just find that context essential. I personally, based on what I've seen, believe it's not funded enough, because I think actually people are of technical expertise, people that have that level of expertise, it's hard to retain them in the public sector, just like planners in local councils. And I think people who have that level of expertise for building safety, I think it requires a lot more funding in order to meet the standards that we need. And I think we should be careful of making sure we don't scapegoat. I also wanted to make a reference to yourself, Commissioner, and your comments on Grenfell, and I'm very grateful that you've interspersed it throughout your conversations today. I think Testimony Week has been harrowing, and I've not really tuned into it because I find the viscerality of that experience for people is still so alive, and I've heard that really clearly in your contributions today. So it always fills me with hope when I hear how seriously you take your leadership role, in the sense that I believe you were sitting there and listening and feeling what was in that room, because I think Grenfell has defined how we've restructured our building safety in London, as it should have done. And I look forward to dissecting a little bit more about how that fire last week, or when it was in Wembley that you discussed, demonstrates how we've done a 180 in terms of our building safety. I think that's something I personally, as an Assembly member, want to go and unpack and perhaps come back to you for follow-up to just make sure we can, in the spirit of KPIs, actually see that progression. I've really kind of got the mop-up questions at the end, so I think really everything's been covered, but I think it's probably worth me just putting back to the panel, in terms of community risk management plans, are there any things that the panel would like to continue contributing in terms of how we monitor it, how we evolve it, the challenges we face, and anything else that the committee should keep one eye on so that we can do our job to make sure that we're helping you deliver?
Yeah, in terms of scrutiny and the things I think you should ask us about, again, in the spirit of transparency, I think you need to keep coming back to our training offer, because it's very large in scale, and it's another fundamental paradigm shift. So we have made a lot of improvements in training. You don't get the sort of response you saw on Monday night unless we absolutely change the way we approach that particular response. You don't get a marauding terrorist attack response in London unless we've actually put people through training days, issued them with body armour, and help them recognise the threat. But there's more to do. And I agree with my colleague in the FBU, you can never really do enough training as an operational firefighter. It's the one thing that I come back to repeatedly, and it causes me a degree of, I wouldn't say anxiety, but restlessness. So I think we always need to be questioning that space, and we should enable you to answer those detailed questions. So meeting our deadlines, our targets, and the quality of our training offer right up the top. I think continued questions about the quality of our community engagement, that's come through very strongly. Today, are we really listening to those who are seldom heard? Are we really making the effort to understand our communities? Can we demonstrate that in the quality of the evidence we provide this panel? And culture would be the final one. I think all of this is underpinned by our culture of leadership, our culture of decision making. How we treat each other determines how we see and treat London. So there is no separation for me from culture and CRMP. It sits underneath the whole thing. So I think that constant return to challenge me on whether I'm just virtue signalling or ticking a box, or whether we're actually making a difference on the ground, without wanting to make my life harder. I think if, I can speak well enough into a committee. I think what I would be asking if I was in your shoes is show me the quantitative and qualitative evidence from your workforce in respect to culture that you're making a change. Because I can tell you what I think. The truth is, colleagues from the FBU are networked in a different way. Colleagues like Verona are out on the ground, should be the ones who have an opportunity to give that answer, because that landscape is complex, is challenging, is difficult. It's one step forward, one step back. You have to hold the progress you've made, whilst recognising that we're still not entirely comfortable in the space. You know, so I think we have made really good progress, but it's a beginning, not an end. So they would be the headlines: training, culture, what we're really doing in the community space.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Could I come in and just say that I think that one of the real challenges, and as we progress through the CRMP over the next few years, is for the LFB to deliver the fundamental transformation of the organisation that has been sort of set in motion and is driving change through the organisation, sometimes at a pace that some members of staff might struggle with, while continue to provide a high quality service that keeps Londoners safe. And it's sort of it's doing that sort of, and I think what challenge I'd expect from this committee is actually challenging on both counts. So challenging on the basic delivery of that emergency service, plus the transformation and that horizon scanning of new risks which regularly come up, and I'd expect to sort of discuss some of those risks in great detail at the plenary next week, so flooding, wildfire, sort of the lithium-ion batteries and so forth. Are they actually looking ahead as well as looking back and learning from incidents that already happened? And are they taking the workforce with them, which is obviously something that Gareth's been able to sort of talk to today, and do the workforce understand why they're being asked to do something, and do they feel that their voice is heard? And I think part of that is through meetings like this, but you can't be going and talking to firefighters round a mess table. And I think that I know Assembly members do that, but I think that unless you speak to people direct, you're just getting that information secondhand. So I'd just encourage Assembly members to continue sort of getting out there, going and seeing what's happening on the ground, asking people what they see. I had a fabulous visit to Forest Hill Fire Station a couple of weeks ago. It was dramatically different in terms of what I heard than last time I went there, which admittedly was 5 or 6 years ago. But I think that it's only by going and speaking to the workforce. If you're looking for transformation and understanding, you can get reports, you can get metrics, but you actually probably need to speak to people on the ground as well. I think it's changing, but unless firefighters on the ground thinks it's changing, it doesn't matter what Andy and I think, or what Fiona Dolman thinks, or even what Gareth on behalf of the FBU thinks, or Verona thinks as a borough commander. It's got to go through the whole organisation, and that's the real test. Is do they understand why they're being asked to do something, and do they feel that if they have concerns about what they're being asked, the organisation is co-creating things with them, or listening to them, or giving them adequate feedback on things that are raised?
I think that's a really helpful summated question that I think we should just go away with. I mean, Chair, I know we're running close to time, but I did just want to ask Fiona, Gareth and Verona if they wanted to add anything.
Yeah, just quickly. I know we're pushed for time. I suppose it just talks really about firefighters again. Obviously, I'm here to represent firefighters and officers rank and file. But it's the 3 A's, isn't it? It's adaptability, agility and ability that makes a professional firefighter that serves the community of London. And with regards to the CRMP and these 6 broad headings and what that should afford our members and the employees of the brigade, we do need to step into a space where a lot of our firefighters are excellent problem solvers. That's what they do. They're brilliant. They turn up to something and they will fix it like that. And you know, like often things will get in their way and you think, no, there's no way they're going to get through this, but they come up with a solution all the time. They work in teams. Their creative problem solving is not to be missed. You know, it's something really exceptional. And I was talking to a colleague from New York last night, actually, and funnily enough, the politics run quite parallel on bits and pieces. And I think what I'd say is, for me, the CRMP needs to be able to translate to operational frontline firefighters that they have that ability, agility and adaptability to be able to carry out their role, you know, free from too much red tape, should we say, and to let them grow as people, to recognise just how important the lowest paid members of this workforce are in that practitioner role. It's always seemed perverse to me. They go out there and take the greatest risk and they perform the greatest acts of human kindness.
Yeah.
You know, I view it as a real privilege, and I think you can see this, to be able to sit in front of you today and represent firefighters, rank and file, because they're exceptional people. They're exceptional people, and they're us. They're Londoners. They're people that have come from various different backgrounds, whether they come with a degree or they come from an old YTS scheme and found their way through here, and they've got various skills. They're so exceptional, they're so important, and my point is this, okay? The CRMP means nothing without them, and it means nothing without the support and the understanding of what they need out on the front line. And whilst there's very much this place for politics, just that understanding the psychological and physical fitness of our firefighters must be paramount in order to deliver safety to the communities they so proudly serve.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, Chair.
We need to end it there. Can I just thank you so much? I'm sorry we've run over time. I really try to bring meetings in on time. We're ever so slightly over time. Thank you all very, very much for your contributions today. We've had a wide-ranging conversation. I think we've all found it very helpful. Just to the committee members, quickly, can we note the report and today's discussion? Noted. And can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output from this discussion? Agreed. And can we note can we note the committee work programme for the 23-24 and the additional activity undertaken since this last meeting, namely in the informal meeting with the London Fire Commissioner on the 15th of January 2024.
Noted.
And the next meeting of this committee is scheduled for the 27th of February 2024 at 10 a.m. in the Chamber at City Hall. I have no other urgent business, and I now declare the meeting to be closed.
Thank you,
Chair.
Thank you. Right.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.